well. How are you? I think we replaced your page already.
Folks paying attention.
Yeah. Good.
Okay.
No, Lisa's not there.
Okay. Hi. Start. Welcome, everyone. We apologize for being late. We were busy doing important business. We don't chit chat at all. We go straight to work when we're in executive session, and we ran overtime. And thank you for and we apologize for the location change this evening. The board just met in executive session to consider matters regarding proposed pending or current litigation and collective negotiations pursuant to Article 14 of the Civil Service Law. I ask that everyone stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Okay, we will now approve the minutes. We have February 8th and February 15th. Any questions, comments? Hearing none, I'll accept the minutes as is. Action 4, approval of treasurer's report, January 2024. And we'll take that with action 5, approval of the claims audit report from January 2024. Do I have a motion? Okay, I heard a second. Questions, comments?
Looking good.
All in favor? Okay, thank you. Oh, true. Okay. We have a report from our SGO president, Ms. Ava DeFeo. What's going on?
The first thing I noticed with coming back and also a few weeks before break was the attendance at our SGO meetings. That's like greatly improved, like from the beginning of the year to now. There's definitely just been a lot more people coming, like all the representatives, having everyone there. It's always good to just have everyone's opinions, and also just underclassmen participation, like in group conversations, like which is definitely something that you don't really see a lot on it. I'm not gonna lie. So it's been good to like just see the freshmen not being scared to talk to like jump into conversation with the seniors and that kind of thing.
Dr. Z and I want to come to a meeting.
You
I was
totally
just
should.
thinking
Yeah,
that. You read
we
my
want to.
mind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
And I
we
will
meet Wednesdays after school.
Okay,
So-
and I will come also as a former SGO president of North Shore. Okay.
You have
An
to
alumni.
tell them, Ava, we don't want you to be dishonest. Tell them that Kate McKinnon is coming. You gotta tell them, you can't say I'm coming or the attendance might not be great.
Right, we'll go down when we're at our meeting.
just a bunch of attendance for that, and it was super successful. And then our music trip just came back from the high school. They had a great time in Europe. From what I've heard, I've asked people who went on the trip, they had no complaints at all. We had a request from the PTO to start advertising the faculty basketball game, which is basically each class competing against the faculty and staff in the school. It's just a fundraiser and just a way to have some fun. So if any of you are interested, feel free to sign up. We have sports night, which is a week away. And then our men's basketball team won their semifinals game last night against Cold Spring Harbor. So they're going to the counties. And then our women's basketball team varsity basketball is playing right now at Farmingdale for the semifinals.
Thank you. We will see you in a couple of weeks. All right, thanks, Eva. We now move on to the report of the superintendent. Dr. Zaid, what's going on?
So some of what I'm going to say, Ava mentioned, but it's worth repeating. I want to thank Mr. Domingo, all of our music faculty, Mr. Contreras, Ms. Rodriguez, for everything they did to organize a highly successful music tour of Italy, Slovenia, and Croatia. It's such a great opportunity for our students. And they were live streaming some of the performances from there, which is just extra amazing, but just a powerful experience for them, and it went really, really well. So thank you. We're going to get a video montage I'll be able to share with the board. It was really powerful. The track team took a trip to Arizona, and they visited several different areas in Arizona, but also the Olympic Training Center, which looked really interesting. And I think we have a montage there that we'll share with the board. I did want to mention also the Lunar New Year celebration at the middle school this week was just so overwhelming and amazing. Our Asian Student Alliance, our Mandarin teachers, and the community came out. We also had a parent university that evening, so Dr. Smythe and I were there for both, and we were just so overwhelmed. I walked in, and there was an older gentleman singing a song in Chinese. It was just so moving, and you're just looking on the faces of the teachers who had put it together with the students, and it was just such a powerful moment for our community. Just so grateful for the team that put it together and for the community coming together. And like I said, we had a great parent university and civil discourse that right after the Lunar New Year celebration, and it was a really great resources. This is work that Mr. Gordon and Ms. Ritter have been working on for a few years, and it's really grown. And we had such a great conversation, so we look forward to sharing that work with a bigger audience. Men's basketball indeed defeated Cold Spring Harbor last night, 47-39, and they're playing Friends Academy on Saturday at 1:15 at Farmingdale again for the county championship. So we're very excited for that. And our women's team is playing right now. So if we have any updates, we will let you know. In other athletics news, this Friday and Saturday we have varsity boys swimming in the state championship in Ithaca, New York, and we have one swimmer competing, which is amazing. We have two winter track athletes for women's winter track in Staten Island on Saturday competing, and last weekend we had a wrestler competing in the state championship. So we're proud of all of our athletes, and we will have spring sports starting soon. We are going to have JV and varsity sports starting on Monday, March 11th, and middle school sports starting the following Monday, March 18th. So if you haven't signed up for Family ID yet, parents, please let us know if you need any help. We know that can sometimes be cumbersome. I want to give an update on elementary school construction, and I'll be sending out a message to the community. We had to go through a lot of different hurdles. This board and Mr. Pappas and Mr. Hall did a great job in navigating a very difficult situation. We're happy to report that construction has begun again in our elementary schools, libraries, and bathrooms, and we're already making nice progress. It started on Tuesday over the break, and we'll give specific timelines on those completion dates for those projects and our high school front entrance, which is getting close as well. We always hate to overpromise and underdeliver, so we're going to underpromise and hopefully overdeliver and give you some good news shortly. But we think, within the next few weeks on the high school, and then, it'll be longer for those other projects, but we'll get you information shortly. I want to thank our faculty for really helping out a colleague who is in need of sick days. And this has happened on several occasions throughout my many years here, where there was a need for something In this case, it was for sick bank donation days, and within 10 minutes, I had 20 days. Another hour, I had 40 days, and I'm still getting today donations. Some people said take 20 days, take 5 days out of my bank. It was just so amazing, and I didn't want to get teary-eyed, but it was just one of those moments, and it reminded me of Friday the 13th before we shut down during the pandemic in 2020. I wrote a simple email asking all the faculty to give me their Google classroom codes, which is kind of a weird request. And I had 400 Google Classrooms on my dashboard and within a couple hours. It's that kind of, when we did our Tri-States review, the same kind of effort. So really want to thank our faculty for just being so aware of the collective and common good and just dedicated to this place. Thank you. Just an update on the Glen Head principal search. We have 85 applicants on the OLAS system. And we're really excited to start the process, which we're going to involve our Glen Head families, our Glen Head teachers certainly, in to help build a candidate profile that we use when we do the screening of resumes and the screening of candidates. We'll have committee interviews. And then this year, for this principal search, we're going to do some field experiences, observations of teachers, meeting the faculty, meeting parents. And so it's a special district, a special building, and so we're going to put some special hurdles in place to make sure we get the very best individual. So we're excited for that. We're very grateful for Miss Dugan, though, who's been our interim principal at Glen Head. She's doing an amazing job, and her experience has really been helpful, and she's going to help us in the search, so we're excited for that. One last statement. I know there's been some buzz around BOCES programs and programs that the district allows students to go to, and I just want to ensure that almost every BOCES program for students the district supports. We did do a presentation last spring to showcase that, and we're very supportive of that. There are a few programs that, in the opinion of the administration, are duplicative to full-time programs that we have at the high school. Dance, theater, musical programs. We offer a very robust program here. So those are the programs where we're a little more critical about sending students, but we're talking about 4 programs out of 50. So we overwhelmingly support the BOCES programs, but I know there's been a little confusion. It had always been our policy, but over our last couple of years, there's been some breakage in that. So if there's any confusion about that, I just want to encourage parents to reach out to me and I can clarify that. And then finally, I just want to encourage folks to attend our What Makes Us Us and Keeps Us Us community talks that are starting next week. We'll have our middle school parent meeting on Wednesday. Thursday, we'll be talking with business owners across the district. Monday the 11th, high school parents. Monday the 25th, we'll be talking to elementary parents. And then Wednesday the 27th, we'll have our community meeting with residents. Anybody can come, but we really do want to speak to residents who do not have students in the schools because we don't have as many opportunities there. Notice how I kept the 26th open because that's basketball. I think that's the faculty basketball game, and I have a healthy knee this year, so I'm going to try. I promised Miss Ayers I would try. Might only get a couple minutes in, but I'll be there with Mr. Contreras and Mr. Doherty. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Z. So feel free to leave. Thanks.
Thank you, Ava.
Yeah. So tonight we're going to be starting the board's review of the superintendent's proposed 24-25 school budget. I say we'll be starting it because crafting a budget doesn't occur over one meeting or several meetings or even over the course of a year. It is a process that begins 5 years earlier. In fact, as my fellow trustees know, each year's budget binder includes a 5-year budget projection report. So the public should be aware that this board and central office takes a long-term view on budget planning, considering next year's budget within the context of what could happen in the 28-29 school year. Tonight, we'll be looking at the superintendent's overview of the budget, but on March 14th and April 4th, we will be going line by line, looking at every single budgeted expense so closely. We'll even be looking at the sewing machine repair costs in the high school fax room and the smart board bulb replacements at Glen Head School. On April 18th, the board will adopt the budget and it becomes our own. And on May 21st, the budget is put to the community for a vote. For anyone listening tonight, we encourage you to log on to Board Docs from the district's website so you can follow along with the trustees as we review certain pages out of our very large budget book. All of the information is publicly available, again, demonstrating this board's commitment to communicating with the public in real time. Before we start, I want to convey to the community that this year's proposed budget diverges significantly from those of previous years. Historically, our budgets have been instrumental in advancing our schools. Throughout the years, we've implemented innovative programs, created new teaching positions for additional electives, and even revamped turf fields, all from the budget. But that is not what you will be hearing this year. Spoiler alert, this year's proposed budget has no additional positions, no new programs, and all departmental and building budgets have been cut. Nonetheless, we are diligently working to determine how best to preserve the essential elements of our very special North Shore education so we can continue to best equip our children for their roles as future citizens of this world. We are now at a precipice of a pivotal moment where the longstanding investment in our schools and in our children meets incredible fiscal pressures. The real question is, can we work together as a community to safeguard the vital elements of our education for generations of North Shore students to come? So Dr. Z, I turn it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. McCarron. I think that opening really sets up the challenge that Mr. Pappas, Dr. Smythe, and I, and the full administrative team and the full faculty had with developing this budget. Like you said, it was more challenging than even last year's budget to put together, but I want to thank Mr. Pappas and Dr. Smythe for all of your contribution, all of the thinking that really began in July, and all of the tinkering, looking at staffing grids, looking at departmental budgets, looking at tax levies, projected assessed values, all of the data to look at how we could make that balance work. Preserve the special experience that students have here while also being cognizant of the pressures that our district and all of our residents are under, given the challenges that we're facing with the loss of revenue from the LIPA agreement with Nassau County and other challenges as a result of rising costs that all districts are facing. So without any further ado, Mr. Pappas and I are going to move down to the podium. I have left each trustee with a printed out version of our presentation. I do have some extras here. And I do want to echo what Dr. McCary said about the use of Board Docs. I did upload the full budget booklet to Board Docs, and it is also on the budget page of the website. Thank you to Ms. Newman. So at this time, it's okay. We're going to move down and look at the presentation. Thank you. Yeah, whatever you decide. I think this screen will block it. I do want to take a moment to thank Mr. K for everything he did, as well as Mr. Hall and our buildings and grounds and custodial teams. We found out at around 3:30 that we didn't have any heat in our middle school. We're working on it. But that just made it impossible to hold the meeting at the middle school where we've really settled into. So we were on the phone with Mr. K and Mr. Hall and really hustled. It was a little stressful there to get things going. So thank you so much. And I think that hustle, that ingenuity, and that innovation is just so emblematic of who we are as a district and as a board, as an administrative team. So tonight we give you our proposed budget from the superintendent and the central office for the 2024-25 school year. As you know, this proposed budget is the fodder for much deliberation, discussion, debate. We are going to have a series of community meetings, like I mentioned, to really deliberate the decisions that we need to make. So it is a starting point, like Dr. McCary said. But we are nonetheless confident in the decisions and the work that we have done so far. This is actually our fourth budget presentation this year. We had two presentations in the fall because we knew this would be a challenging budget to put together. So we did some preview meetings. And then at our last Board of Education meeting, we looked at data and we looked at some cost figures. We're still working on that report. We believe that some of that information will be helpful in helping us make decisions going forward. So this budget is similar in some ways, different than others from previous years. Certainly the sensitivity to fiscal pressures is greater than in previous years. We did, I think, in line with the second item, we sought to reduce more costs and seek other revenue sources, probably more than any other year in the 15 years that I've worked here in the district. And we're going to look at specific cuts that we're proposing. At the same time, this district is built upon the shared valued outcomes, the core values that everything we do in this district, not only instruction, but every hiring protocol, everything we do is built on the shared valued outcomes and the North Shore Journey plan to operationalize our students' journey towards mastery and sophistication in those outcomes. So when we're making decisions about what to keep or what not to keep or what to make more efficient, we want to make sure we don't compromise that. That is key. We want to also our goal was to maintain existing programs and resources while also meeting the needs of students. Things like our L population, our English language learners, our special education students. We shared at our last meeting that we have a 17% rate of classification for special ed. We have a robust special education program. But also our programs that students have had here at North Shore as well. Our goal was to maintain that. We'll talk more about that choice versus increased class size and the opportunity cost there. We wanted to continue to strengthen academic supports and meet all of our students' academic needs, things like academic intervention and reading instruction. We have a new reading approach to reading, the science of reading, I believe, the work that Ms. Ritter and Dr. Smythe are leading, as well as our principals and our literacy coaches, very much on the cutting edge. And that work is continuing with force. Very proud of that work. We want to, of course, continue outdoor learning and field trip programs, field experiences, but also have adequate security to protect students when learning inside and outside the classrooms. It's been tradition here at North Shore to have a robust professional learning program. In the summer, we have a very unique summer professional learning academy. Now we have the summer student experience as well since COVID, since the board's support of that in the year 2020. We've brought that back. That was here years ago. We're changing the payment model of that to keep that alive, where parents are contributing now. But maintaining those has been very important. And of course, our facilities, which we've spoke about at a few meetings ago, and we'll talk about tonight. I believe Mr. Pappas is going to speak for a few minutes now. We're going to trade off and on.
While we certainly will go into more details as we go through the following meetings and even tonight, we're just starting with the basics of the budget. The personnel and benefits on the expense side is certainly one of the greatest expenses for any school district, and one that we we have challenges with in terms of contractual obligations and benefits and things that are very hard to simply adjust. We also have to look at the maintenance of our infrastructure, and that goes even beyond just the large capital projects that you see, but the everyday maintenance of our buildings. And finally, on the expense side, the next big category is the materials and supplies and the things that are used throughout the buildings, not just educational and instructional supplies, but also those supplies to maintain the buildings. And they're all offset. You work for a balanced budget by the state aid that we receive, other revenues, and then our largest revenue, which is the tax levy. As was mentioned earlier in the meeting, as we sat down, the precursor to this, we start the budget process very early. July, August, really kicks off in early September, but we start by laying out the priorities, what we're going to look for in the current year, what we're trying to do next year, and where we want to be 3 or 4 years down the road. The development begins with meetings with the different administrators, the directors, the principals of each of the buildings to find out really what they need and what they're looking for in their buildings and in their departments over the next couple of years. And that creates a number of drafts. We sit down, we highlight the priorities and the goals. The administrators, directors, and principals create a budget. We sit down and go through that budget line by line and see where we can have efficiencies, things that are very necessary, things that may not be in there that we want to include. And we have several drafts throughout the budget process. And then there's a communication. And, you know, much of the communication is starting now, but it also started several months ago. We've met with revenue generation committees. We've met with the community several times, and we're always talking and speaking with the administrators on what they need and the challenges that we may have as they go forward preparing their budget. I talked about the challenges. You know, there are, in the preparation of the budget, we deal with all of the same challenges that every school district does: inflation, interest rates, the high rise in costs, contractual obligations. But one thing that is unique that we have with very few have had to deal with is other challenges. We're dealing with the LIPA situation, which was unique to North Shore. The continued impact of the loss of revenues due not only to the result of the settlement between Nassau County, but also due to the loss of grant monies that we had been receiving to help us with that. We had a large decrease in those grant funds this past year going into next year, and this is something that we have to deal with and work through. Other challenges that we share with other districts, as I mentioned, include the uncertainty of state resources, the impact of inflation on goods, the rising costs of debt service. But at the time, the district committed itself to a 2019 bond. Interest rates were very low, but as we got through our construction process, they have rose significantly during that borrowing. So that has really been a challenge that we're working with.
We've shown this before, but when we craft curriculum, we think in terms of larger understandings and essential questions, and this has been a focus for us. What is the essential question for us to try and answer or to deliberate and think around is this: how do we create the best possible experience for students and balance the pressures of revenue loss, rising costs, and the impact on taxpayers, while also meeting the high expectations of families with students attending our schools who moved into North Shore for a high quality education? So that's a mouthful, but it really gets at the complexity of the pressures that we are trying to balance in thinking of everyone in this community. Pappas referred to it, but one unique pressure that we face, along with a couple of other communities on Long Island, is the heavy reliance that this community has had historically on revenue from utilities, specifically the Glenwood Landing LIPA properties. In June of 2022, the district received confirmation of the County of Nassau and LIPA reaching an agreement, which would change the assessment structure of properties within the North Shore Central School District. Basically, those properties were to be taken off the tax rolls. LIPA had launched a huge tax certiorari case against the county, worth hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars, if not greater. In the end, the county made a settlement, and this agreement led to the district being paid direct assessments instead of taxes that would continue to accrue value, and those assessments would go down over time. Part of the issue we're having this year is we are losing a big chunk of direct assessment payment from LIPA, and then we will have a period of a couple of years of stability over the next couple of years. We'll get more specific about that later. Direct assessments are not affected by the property value or adjusted base proportions and decrease each year. And so what that means is that when that's taken off of the tax rolls, less tax is absorbed by those LIPA properties than they used to be, and tax then shifts to those other classes. When you think about communities that have a lot of retail property, those properties absorb a lot of the tax away from the homeowners. We have lost that over time, and we're going to show the percentage over time like we have in the past. But specifically this year, we're losing $2.388 million over last year. And so that's the unique challenge. Every district is facing rising costs in terms of interest. Healthcare is a big cost driver, contractual obligations. But we also have the fact that we are losing money that we had last year. So we're starting in the negative, and then we have increasing costs like everyone else. So we have a much bigger distance to travel than most districts. I did want to point one more thing out before we move on, and that is, as we're making decisions about this budget, it is really important, in our view, that we consider a potential loss from the LIPA Nassau County deal of $8.4 million in one single year. We are doing due diligence, the Legislative Action Committee, myself, the board as a whole, our lobbyists, to try and figure out what other development might take place on the LIPA properties before 2027. But in the absence of that development, the district stands to lose that amount of money in one single school year. So that is something to think about when we make decisions now and preserve funding in anticipation of a potential loss of that magnitude. When we add that up in the aggregate, without the loss in 2027, we stand to lose over $38 million. And part of how we calculate that total is the fact that if those properties remained on the tax roll, they would be paying more tax, just like you are, just like our residents are and our parents are. But not only are they paying a flat rate, but a decreasing rate. So there's a big revenue chunk coming off. That total would be over $45 million if we lose that revenue in 2027. And over to Mr. Pappas again.
So this slide represents the adjusted base proportions over time. And the adjusted base proportions are determined by the county, but it's the percentage of the tax levy that will be paid by each property class. When the county settled with LIPA, we saw a large shift in the adjusted base proportion from class 3 utilities to class 1 homes, which you can see at the bottom. Between 22 and 23, almost a 8 or 9% change in the adjusted base proportions, an increase to the homes and a decrease to the utilities. But this slide also illustrates that that has been happening over the last 20 years. Even without that, there has been a steady decrease and shift of taxes from the utilities to the homeowners. Fast forward to today, we're seeing over 83% of the burden of taxes has fallen upon the homeowners in the North Shore School District, while the utilities are just paying a little over 8%. Again, the calculation of adjusted base proportions is out of our hands. It's something that's controlled by the county, but does have a major impact on the taxes that are paid. Another illustration where it shows the blue line, the adjusted base proportions of the homeowners, class 1 properties, steadily rising, while all of the other properties either stay the same or have gone down. Specifically, the utilities has gone down the greatest. Finally, a pie chart that also helps to show the increase in the tax class share. To the left is the 2001, where you can see just over 50% of the taxes were being paid by class one, and to the right, 2020, the 2024 tax class is over 83%. So such a large piece of this, the taxes have been pushed off onto the homeowners. And that's something we acknowledge and work with as we formulate the budget, taking into account all of the pressures on everybody.
Think about, just to go back to the pie chart for a second, community member who moved into the North Shore School District in 2001, having a certain structure of monthly payment or tax payment in mind, and how even if the budget remained flat, just the percentage increase alone would lead to an increase, a dramatic increase in what that original expectation was. And that's part of what is original, I think, to this community, to a community like Northport that's going through something similar, Port Jefferson as well, and districts upstate, Hendrick-on-Hudson, they're dealing with the Indian Point power plant closure. And that's what's unique. At the same time, we do have folks who've moved in within the last 5 years who are, have had this, pie chart structure on the right that you're seeing. Okay, so during our fall budget meetings, we had made a prediction of the incoming deficit. So every school district has an initial operating deficit that's usually driven by costs. It's driven by the contractual obligations. Payments to employees go up by certain percentages. Use 2% as an example around that. Healthcare costs, any kind of inflationary costs that go up. There's been a lot in the news about insurance costs going up, not just health insurance, but other insurance. So all of those drivers, just things that we have, we're not increasing anything, but the vendors and the services are being increased. So that's a pressure. Again, what makes it unique for North Shore is the fact that we're dealing with those increases and then we're losing money that we counted on from the previous year. So close to the prediction that we made in the fall, North Shore had a $7.5 million deficit, and that's comprised of two pieces: a revenue piece, a loss of funding that we had last year of $3.15 million. That includes that $2.388 million of LIPA loss, as well as a loss of state aid, commonly known as the Gorin grant, the grant that we had gotten every year from Senator Jim Gorin. That we did not get this year. We did get a partial grant from Assemblyman Levine, which we're very grateful for. And at the same time, we had a rise in costs of $4.35 million. If you look at budgets across Long Island school budgets, I think that number is probably similar or lower or higher, depending on the district size. But what you won't see is that first bullet, the loss of revenue, compounding the distance we have to travel. So we got to work. As a result, we needed to find both increases in revenue and in a reduction in costs. In terms of the revenue side, to patch that up, we were able to find $1.57 million in total. We were fortunate. We know some districts are losing state aid. We received a net $402,000 increase in New York state aid. And in order to make that calculation, you have to back out the UPK aid, which can only be used for the UPK program. And so we don't tally that when we look at state aid numbers or increases. Also, we have an increase of $425,000 in receivable tuition and interest based on some of the decisions that Mr. Pappas has made, but also in trying to create tuition paying programs into our district. We have an ABA program at Seacliff School that was new this year, and it's a slow but steady start to that effort. And then Mr. Pappas and I are recommending the use of more from our reserves this year, given the pressures that we're under, almost $700,000 more than we used last year for the current budget we're in. On the cost reduction side, like Dr. McCary was referring to, we found $2.5 million total in cutting, $1.4 million from non-instructional cuts and $1.1 in instructional cuts. This is similar to the amount that we cut last year, but what was different is that last year we had contingency positions. We had the ability to cut some positions that students would not notice as much. This year that was harder, and that's something we talked about last year. We knew it would be harder. And so while we believe this budget preserves the North Shore experience for students, they are going to start to see it. They are going to start to notice it, even though we believe the impact will be minimal on them and their well-being. They will start to notice it. They're going to start to notice larger classes. They're going to start to notice some constraints in terms of classes that they will be able to take. But we tried to keep that to a minimum by going deep on non-instructional cuts. So what do we mean by that? Things like the principal's budgets of supplies, the curriculum director's budgets for supplies, things like Mr. K's budget for technology, how we could find savings in those areas without impacting students, but maybe making different decisions about what we purchase. And I really want to thank our directors, our administrative team for finding that much. In our view, we tried to do that as much as we could to preserve the student experience. That's not something we can do every year because we are now at a point where it will be hard to decrease those budgets next year. But whereas we kept those budgets flat last year, this year when making the budget, we went deep to find savings, and we'll detail those in a minute. So after these efforts, that left a net deficit of $3.5 million. So just to look at this graphically, we had an initial budget deficit of about $7.5 million. And that came from LIPA and the loss of the grant. That's a little over $3 million. And then the costs, salaries, insurance, and special ed increases. We increased the use of reserves, state aid, and tuition. And that left an initial 5.97, almost $6 million need for revenue. What's interesting, and this is really something that gets me, and I don't want to make light of it, but if we weren't dealing with LIPA at that point, so at this point we haven't made any cuts, we'd need to find $2.8 million. And I joke with Jamie and Carol, and I say we would have that done before lunch. Not to make light of it, but it really is that LIPA loss pressure that creates this unique experience. With the cuts we made, you could see if we made $2.5 million in cuts, we would be close to only needing $300,000 without the LIPA loss pressure. So that's what makes this so unique. It's not just raising costs, but it's the loss of revenue. We're adding no positions. We're cutting back. We're definitely in contraction mode, but it is still very difficult. And so this shows the distance traveled to where we are, that $7.5 million deficit, budget cuts to get the deficit down to $5 million, and then using on the revenue side, $1.5 million from reserves, tuition, and state aid to get to $3.5 million that we still need. Okay, so where do some of these cuts come from? And the purpose of the community meetings that we're going to have over the next few weeks before the budget is adopted is so that we can discuss some of this with the community, with the different stakeholders in the community to get their perspective. That'll inform our discussions that we have at central office and certainly in our board meetings. Teacher aides and monitors, our curriculum director codes, our athletic codes. And I want to just be clear there because we've had a lot of conversations. This is not a cut. It's keeping last year's budget flat. So before our athletics parents become concerned, it maintains our current programs. Facility codes, principal codes, security. And again, too, I want to, this might be a topic of discussion with any of these items. We're looking at things like overtime or incremental coverages, additional coverages over the course of a year. So it's a cumulative effect, where it's not a major cut in security. It's looking at things a little differently. Special education staff development, a slight cut. Much we found of that staff development is covered through Dr. Smythe's codes of general professional development. Technology, out-of-district placements for students. We found savings there this year because of students moving out of the district. And then these are kind of connected to the instructional cuts, but retirement and benefits payments that we would have paid for positions that we are cutting. And the capital fund, a small decrease of $50,000. Let's say the capital fund is a fund in the budget where we can do construction work projects. For example, we use that section of the budget 2 years ago to complete the high school gym floor. We used it in this current budget to partially fund the turf field and the dance studio. This year, we're looking at projects outdoors, partly in the press box. We're receiving a grant to complete the press box, but some of the other projects that we've been talking about outdoors more as we shift to the outside of our buildings. So this is a cut to that code. So we could still do a large amount of that work that we plan, but it helps create the whole, get us to the goal we needed to get to. Okay, instructional cuts. I want to be careful here, and part of this is difficult because we don't have all the information on our teachers who are retiring, and we respect that decision. But at the same time, we're anticipating certain decisions being made where we have different retirements at different levels, at the elementary level, the middle school level, and the high school level. We had one librarian retirement. And then a couple of other positions. The contingency positions are positions we keep in the budget in case we need more teachers. We're already planning to be more efficient. And so we're planning more than ever to not need contingent teaching positions. And we're confident that we will be fine. These are not all of the retirements. These are the retirements that we feel we cannot replace. And that's important because that was an analytical and strategic decision. What we're not saying is this teacher's retiring, we're not going to replace them just automatically. We are looking for those opportunities, though, so we can avoid accessing active employees and more specifically, our most recent hires of active employees and to look for opportunities where we might not need to replace a teacher where it makes sense. At the secondary level where we can afford to make class sizes a little bigger and preserve programming. At the elementary level where we might be graduating one more section out of a school like Glen Head or Glenwood Landing and only getting in a smaller number of sections, so natural attrition. We've spoken with some parents about the librarian. We just had a librarian retire, and while it's hard, we did ask our 2 elementary librarians to cover the 3 buildings. Clearly not what we were used to, but an efficiency that we found. And then we have some other positions as well. These cuts represent a significant amount, but also represent things that students might notice, but that will not impact their learning. It might make classes a little bigger. It might make some schedule choices a little more difficult, but it does keep intact the student experience that will help them to grow and thrive. And then Mr. Pappas is going to speak about the revenue side of the budget.
At the beginning, I talked about the basics of revenues. This breaks it down a little more into the different revenues that we do receive. The first being split properties. And what that is, there are a number of properties that are on the borderline. A small piece of the property may run through another school district. And a piece of that property also runs through the North Shore School District. So in those cases, the homeowner has the right to choose where they would like their their children to go. Most like them to come here to North Shore for obvious reasons. But in those cases, we collect from those other school districts the taxes that were paid on behalf of those students. So that's where the split properties. The next is pilots. We have 2 LIPA peaking stations on Shore Road, and we have a pilot, 4 former Lilco Long Island Lighting properties. A good portion of our pilots and properties were removed from the taxes, but we still have the 2 peaking stations and 4 former Lilco properties that we're receiving pilots from. We're also receiving direct payments from LIPA for those properties that had been removed in the settlement. State aid, the estimates are based on the governor's executive budget proposal. We did receive a small increase in state aid this year, not as much as last year. Last year, we received a large increase due to a correction in foundation aid that a lot of school districts received. But that correction was to make all school districts whole for prior aid that they hadn't received in previous years. So that has kind of brought us up to where we were supposed to be, and we did recognize a small increase. Then there are the miscellaneous revenues, which include adult education, tuition-related revenues, interest, reimbursements from New York City for the St. Christopher School, and any income that we would get from refunds or reimbursements or even use of our property. And then there's fund balance. The current year's operations, we are using a portion of the Bullet grant from the state. We're also using some of the LIPA money that we received in the settlement, as well as increasing the ERS and TRS use of reserves to help fund this budget. And the largest revenue, which we mentioned earlier, were the school taxes that will be raised to fund the remainder of the budget loss, revenue loss. This is the state aid budget. As you can see, it has gone up each year. The largest increase was in between 22 and 23, as I mentioned, with the correction of foundation aid. But this year was just about a $400,000 increase to a little over $9 million. These amounts do not include, as Dr. Zubliona said, do not include the UPK aid. We've had questions in the past, well, why does the state say you're getting this much in state aid, but that's not reflected in your budget? That's because the UPK aid is an expenditure-driven aid, which means depending on how many students we have, they will pay us for the cost of those students. So the more students, the more aid we would be utilizing. But if we don't have students in the pre-K program, we don't get to keep the additional UPK aid that isn't used. It's strictly a payback of the expenditures for having the students in the UPK, and it is a set amount. This is a good view of the distribution of revenues, going from the charges of services all the way down to the extraordinary items, capital grants, operating grants. But right in the middle, you see the largest source of revenue, as I've mentioned, is the property tax. And this shows the property taxes and the other revenues over 2 years. One thing's interesting to see, as you can see from 22 to 23, the decrease in property taxes. That was the year in which we lowered our tax levy to account for the loss of LIPA. But on the side of the other revenues, you'll see that increase, and that reflects the increase in the direct assessments that we received from LIPA. But here's the revenues at a glance. We're looking at a couple of the items that you can see where our big decreases are, which we've talked about. The former local properties, which are now on direct assessment or small remaining pilot, we're losing about $2.4 million, almost 2.4 from the direct assessment, and about $25,000 to $30,000 from one of our pilots. We're also losing about $750,000, or exactly $750,000, from the Bullet grant that we received in the past. Last year we had received $1 million. We're very grateful that we got another $250,000 this year, but it is still a hit to our revenues. So we're anticipating a total proposed tax levy of $92,621,506. This is a significant amount less than what our tax cap would be, or what we could go to. Our tax levy that we're that we can go to without having to force a supermajority of the vote to pass is $94,108,000. You'll see, so we're about under our tax cap by about $1.5 million, similar to where we were last year. Coming under the tax cap. So here's another slide that kind of shows the tax levy that would be permitted, where we were last year. So the estimated maximum allowable tax increase that we could have would be $5 million. Our proposed tax increase right now is $3.5 million. So we are under the tax cap by about 1.5. With percentages, the estimated maximum tax increase that we could have would be a 5.631% increase in the tax levy. Our proposed tax levy reflects an increase of 3.962%.
One thing I wanted to mention, and we tend to present a little earlier than other districts, but I think one thing we strongly believe you'll see this year is that you'll see more districts with percentages of 3 or higher in their tax levy increases, and that's because of the loss of state aid. So they're experiencing some revenue loss and greater increases in expenses. We have this LIPA revenue loss that just makes it even harder, and we will see, but we don't think even with that, our tax levy percentage will be that much higher. This year, the budget to budget increase is 1.9%. So that means in terms of the costs, because of the proposed cuts that we're making, we have kept those costs down. We have all of those drivers and increased costs that are outside of our control, and we've worked to keep those costs down. The issue is the revenue loss, and that's where the tax levy comes in. Because of that loss of revenue, we need to replace that revenue. And just to reiterate, the starting point of $7.5 million, the increased use of reserves, state aid tuition, and then that need to find revenue of $6 million. Before we start, just kind of do a review of the tax cap, I did want to mention the UPK aid because often that grant amount is unused by districts. And I do want to say Dr. Smythe, Mr. Gordon, who's helping us, our elementary principals, really worked hard to maximize the use of that grant. It's not easy to use. The state gives a very small amount, $5,400 per student, whereas most pre-Ks will charge about $10,000 per student for the year. So we believe we're providing great programs. We're operating 6 classes and a couple more students at the Glen Cove YMCA. And so when you calculate that and what parents would be paying, because it's totally free for parents who are participating in that grant, it's over $1 million of savings collectively versus what parents would pay if they were paying for private UPK.
I spoke quickly about the tax cap in a previous slide, so I'll go into a little more detail on what the tax cap is and what it makes up. The tax cap is the amount by which a school district may raise the overall tax levy. Typically, a district can present a tax levy that is in excess of the tax cap, but under those circumstances I had mentioned, they would need a passing vote by at least 60% of the voters. Many people refer to the 2% tax cap, the tax cap as a 2% tax cap, but the calculation is much more detailed and involved than that, and it's not necessarily just a 2% increase. That increase just makes up a small portion of what the calculation is. The 2% tax cap is the 2% refers to a district's allowable growth factor is either 2% or the consumer price index. In this case, the lesser of. So in this case, the consumer price index over the past year was over 8%. Therefore, the most that we can use in the allowable tax is a 2%. Had the consumer price index been lower than 2%, that would be our top point at which we could increase the tax cap with the allowable growth factor. However, other things that go into that are changes in pilots. A large reduction in the changes of pilots or changing your tax structure will force an exclusion, which increases your tax cap. Also, changes in your capital expenditures, they get put into the calculation. That also has an effect on your tax cap if they go up. If there are a lot of them, then your tax cap is higher. If there's less, then that goes down. And then if you had any portion of the prior year's tax cap that you didn't use, you could apply it to this year. However, that is the portion of the last year's tax cap before putting in any exclusions. So while we were under the tax cap last year, we weren't under the tax cap without exclusion. Therefore, those aren't items that because we were under last year, we can't carry that over to this year. So the tax cap does not speak of or refer to a tax on an individual property. It's the total amount of taxes that are levied on all classes by the district. So the change in taxes on an individual property is determined by several other variables. Certainly the first being the tax levy. The school district sets the tax levy, but then the net assessed value for all property classes, which is calculated by the county, is the percentage of is the total value for all the properties in a particular class. Then they take that and they apply the adjusted base proportions, which is the percentage of taxes that will be paid by each one of those property classes. Again, that's provided in September and it's determined by the county. And finally, there's the taxable assessed value on an individual property that also affects the tax that will be placed on that particular property. So you could have two properties on the same block. They may not have the same taxable assessed value. Therefore, they will certainly have a different final tax payment.
And that taxable assessed value is a really important thing. When you grieve your taxes, basically what you're saying to the county is the taxable value of my house should be less or should be held flat, shouldn't be increased. Part of the calculation that Mr. Pappas referred to is the tax rate. And we're gonna show a little calculation in a minute as to how we get there. But I've shown this a few times, and I think it's worth showing again that North Shore's tax rate, meaning the tax per, in this case, $100,000 of value in your home, is less than a lot of other school districts that we are ranked higher than, quite frankly, and perform better than. That tax rate of 17.72 that's in this current year, if you had a home of $750,000 next door in Roslyn, Bethpage, East Williston, all great places, but you would be paying more in tax on that value home in those districts. And here I use different colors just to show the cost per pupil, that there isn't a direct correlation, that those in green have a lower cost per pupil than North Shore, but you can see a majority of them in this graph have a higher tax rate, even though they have a lower cost per pupil. So that it's not a straight line. There's more complexity there.
This particular slide, what we've tried to show is what the effect of an increase in taxes are on each home as we go up. We chose a home with a value of a taxable assessed value of $750. And what you'll notice is that at each 0.5% increase in the tax rate, it's approximately $65 per house per year. And it's a considerable amount in terms of revenue to the district. We are looking at a proposed tax rate of 3.962%. The difference between that and even a 5.63 is roughly a little over $200. So the full cap. So it's not a big difference from each 0.5 increase in the tax rate to what the homeowner pays, but it certainly is a big difference in terms of the revenues that are generated for the district. But we certainly are very aware of the pressures that are put on the community, both with the added costs and everything that everybody is dealing with inflation.
So this is just another look at what Mr. Pappas was talking about, that road from the school tax bill and that is voted on, that tax levy in May, to your school tax bill for your property, and just the complexity of it. And so that tax levy, I'm just using a round number example of $90 million, is then divided up, the adjusted base proportion for each tax class. Homeowners, which is most of us, condo residents or co-op residents, which is a smaller group, utilities, which used to pay a lot more for us as a district, and businesses. Some districts have a big class 4. You see that at the Roosevelt Field Mall, wherever there's a lot of retail. The thing is, a a lot of folks want to live in a place where there is less of that because there's less traffic. It's more quiet. And so those areas tend to have less of a class 4. For us, we're estimating, since the LIPA shift has already happened, a somewhat stable 84 to 85%. So that's the percentage that the homeowners would pay. Then, and the problem is we don't know that until the fall what that percentage is going to be. We can say with more certainty this year that it will be more stable. But then all the assessed value of the homes in the county is calculated, and that 75,600,000 is divided by that assessed value, and that's how you get the tax rate. And obviously, you want a lower tax rate as a resident, or you want a lower tax rate per value of your home. And so, this is where we talk about the Engineers Country Club, residential development. Certainly development in new utilities coming in, which we're going to be working on. We're doing research. We're meeting with National Grid. We're trying to get more information on that. Certainly in new businesses opening up that would pay more tax. That would help shift out of the homeowner class. But also, if there's just more homes built and more residential development itself, that will raise that 4.2 up. And that 75.6 million will be divided by a bigger number, lowering the tax rate and the tax that's paid for each $100,000 of home. So development of any kind in any class will ease the tax burden. And so, and the Revenue Generation Committee, the work that the Legislative Action Committee is doing, and the work with our lobbyists, we're trying to look into and get more information on things like wind power. Is that going to bring in revenue to the district? Battery power storage, cell phone towers, cell phone companies, any of those items, and certainly new business development and changing in zoning that would allow for that, or any of those things would make any tax increase, not just in school taxes, but in general portion taxes, more bearable for the individual homeowner. So, and I remember, living in a nearby community thinking, okay, the tax levy is this, it went up by 3%. That means my taxes are going to go up by 3%, but that's not the case. Certainly, if a grievance is honored by the county, taxes will go down for that property as well. But like as Mr. Pappas said, and I always show folks the graph of the one road in Glenhead, and this is on any road in any district on Long Island, 3 homes next to each other, 3 different assessed values from year to year, different changes in assessed values, and 3 very different taxes, same school district, and a similar original value.
So one of the things we look at each year are the major budget drivers, those items that had gone up the most or had the greatest effect on the budget as we prepared it. Employee benefits continues to be one of our largest budget drivers that takes up approximately 66% of the total increase in our expenditures. The other area is instruction at 20.55. That primarily is the contractual obligations, the benefits that I've spoke of, and the costs of the instruction. Debt service takes up only about 2.4%, but it is still one of our largest budget drivers due to interest rates. We're hoping to see those interest rates go down as we start to get into borrowing in the next year, but they are still very high. The fortunate thing about the high interest rates on the debt side is there are also high interest rates on the investment side, so we're able to gain more in terms of revenues with those higher. So as one comes down, the other one will likely go up. The other area is transportation, and that 1.3% is really due to some of the contractual transportation that we have for students in special aid. That was the special education. That was one of the greatest increases in the transportation area. Most of the other areas were flat or went down. Here you can see the breakdown of the numbers. The major increase is due to health insurance, employee benefits. The health insurance went up $1,504,000. The total increase in that area was $1,528,000. So really, health insurance was the biggest driving force of the increase in the employee benefits. We had a 10% increase in health insurance expected between this year and next year, and we had a similar amount last year. So it continues to rise, but the thought is that that will also taper off at some point. Instruction is regular, the contractual obligations and the increase in students in our programs, about $471,000. Transportation, as I mentioned, was not a big increase, but it was primarily due to the increase in special education transportation that it's actually more, while it's an increase, it's actually more beneficial to us when other companies are going in that same direction and we can join with other school districts to transport children. That does help, but when we're doing our own in-house, there's a greater savings when we can do it ourselves in some ways. Debt service and transfers, that includes there was an increase in our debt service due to interest rates of about $500,000, but we also reduced some of our transfers that are all included under that same area. So we see a net change in the debt service and transfer area of about $55,000. In total, those four items make up $2 million, almost $2.1 million of the $2.3 million in expenditure increases, or 90.85%. Here is the projected increases that we've had. The projected increase in our budget to budget is 1.907, under 2%. The average over the last 10 years was about 2.5%. So we did a lot in terms of cutting costs and trying to get the budget to budget. So while it's a very low budget to budget because we've reduced expenditures, we still have, because of the loss of revenues, a big hill to climb, which we've been talking about. But our budget to budget is very low, and I believe it will be one of the lowest, although we won't know that for a couple of weeks till others' budgets start coming out. But we are certainly lower than we have been over average. Are the major expenditure classes broken down by the total budget and the comparison between last year and this year, the current budget and the proposed budget. We have about a 2.294 dollar increase. As I mentioned, 1.97%, under 2%. But the major areas, we've had reductions in some, but again, the employee benefits, large increase. General support for the size of the budget is $117,000 spread over $11 million. It's only about a 1% increase in our regular general operating expenses. We're also looking at pupil transportation, 1%. Most of our areas are less than 1% in terms of increase. Employee benefits, again, one of the highest, and the debt service, tax anticipation notes, and our debt, also a high number. But this gives a good picture of where we are and and how it reflects with last year's budget. There is a graph of the distribution of expenditure similar to the one that was shown on revenues. General support, one of our higher, but doesn't compare to the cost of instruction, which is really why we're here. That's the purpose of the school district. So it makes perfect sense that that's where the majority of our money is spent. And it is, and it's spent on the children, which is amazing. I think more so than any other district when we look at what we give to our students on a day-to-day basis in the education. Pupil transportation, and then it goes down from there.
So, this evening is the initial presentation. We'll be having a discussion about some things like enrollment, efficiencies, and more of a general sense, fund balance. And then beginning with the next meeting on March 14th, we will start to move line by line. Even within those codes, there had been a suggestion of trying to present those different specific pieces with more clarity. So we'll be talking to the board about how we can do that, maybe with shorter presentations, not this long, certainly for each of these meetings, because we need the time for discussion. But we look forward to taking a little more of a creative approach to that to kick off those conversations at each meeting. The board adopts whatever budget is decided upon on April 18th, and then the budget vote and board election is on Tuesday, May 21st this year. So just some key takeaways before we move forward to discussion. One, this proposed budget involves $2.5 million in cuts and $1.5 million in new non-tax revenue. This program preserves programs for students, and it makes significant non-instructional cuts. I think one question that I had coming into this is, what non-instructional cuts were possible that we hadn't looked at. We looked at the detailed budget 20, 25, 30 times over again, just looking to see what we could find that was not related to instruction and program for kids. Also want to thank certainly our directors and our principals for playing a big role in that and really being very open to being a part of the solution. I want to make clear that this is really a no-frills budget, as Dr. McCary was kind of stating. It's more about maintenance and preserving this special place that is North Shore. It adds no new teaching positions and makes some instructional cuts that might lead to some larger classes. We'll definitely see some larger classes, especially at the secondary level. At the same time, this proposed budget will allow us to take some positions and move them around a little bit. Not new positions that we're adding, but for example, I met with Mr. Gordon today and looking at the course requests from our high school students. There's enough to run a whole new business teacher for those courses. It's something our community has been asking for. We obviously cannot add the cost of a new business teacher, so how are we going to do that? The budget that's proposed allows us to move some things around to try and get there. I'm not sure if we'll get to the 1.0 second business teacher, but further cuts would make that definitely much more difficult to do. Also, the mandated expenses morally and legally that we have for our English language learners and our special education students, I should say students who receive special education services. This budget maintains all of those programs and services, and further cuts would lead to a loss of some electives for students and other options for students and larger class sizes at all levels, including the elementary level. And so that's where we'll begin the discussion about our proposed budget. Thank you so much.
Thank you both for that presentation. I also like to think it's nice and toasty in here, which I appreciate. This is like my ideal temperature. Who would like to start?
Can I ask a question about just how we're going to do this?
Yes.
So should we just comment on the presentation, or should we also comment on any questions you might have had on the sections we reviewed in the budget booklet?
Or do you have a preference?
No, that's a good question. Whatever the board prefers, they're not to be indecisive on that, but if there's a way that's more useful for you.
Look, I go ahead. You have a preference? Yeah.
I have a preference.
All right, let's hear.
I think if we go through the whole thing individually without breaking into sections, it could be very
Okay.
long, and we could lose the kind of feedback off each other.
Okay.
So I kind of tailored mine. I can go either way you want.
All right. So do you want to start with main takeaways and then we go into specifics? Let's do that. So main takeaways, everyone. The gestalt, the big picture.
Main takeaways, and then are we doing a second round?
Yeah, we could do a
okay,
second round.
I'm trying to, okay,
We got all night, Maria.
yeah, right. All right, I'm actually going to keep my main takeaways pretty short. I mean, this is, kind of my, and I was thinking after a whole lot of just the sections that we were supposed to review for tonight. As Lisa was pointing out, I do have lots of questions about those that I'm not sure I want to ask tonight, but a lot of them do overlap with questions from the budget presentation tonight. So I'll get to that later. But in terms of main takeaways, first of all, the giant thank you can never be big enough. This isn't, obviously represents an enormous amount of work, and very well presented. Although it does help that it's the fourth time we're seeing some of it, and I mean that. I think repetition in this case is incredibly useful. So, my thanks not only to our leadership here, but to all of the many members of our community that were part of this. I would say that the historical view that you gave today, which we do see, it's a slide we see often, and it is really instructive and worth repeating. It is a big reason that it is so difficult to swallow for those folks who have been here in the community a long time, because they sort of had a compact. We had a compact with the state, and that has changed so drastically in 30 years. But the other side of that is that people are, in fact, still moving here in very significant numbers, because we've managed, prior boards and continuing on. Prior community members and continuing on are have maintained and built the superb quality of our schools. So I think that's an incredible thing to acknowledge. But I also really applaud the long-term view. This, to me, is one of my biggest takeaways. I think that the approach you are taking to manage the cuts in a way that, for as long as possible, that program is not affected, but at the same time being completely clear-sighted about the long-term view and what might happen in 27, 28. That potential cliff of 8.4 million is, of course, feels devastating. And but I think facing it now, and actually I know, Dr. Z, you've been talking about facing it for longer than just this year. We've been aware of it. We still have very little certainty about it, but very, very real concerns about it. So for me, that's one of the biggest takeaways, is that we cannot only plan 1 year at a time. We must be planning so that we don't face that 8.4 million all at once in that year. I'll leave it at that. People are going to have lots of other things.
Thank you. David, big picture.
This is on, yes. I just want to echo Trustee Mosca's words. I know that, Chris, you're here because you are an educator and you always care about students, but you're here at North Shore because I know you love North Shore, and I know how much you and your team live and breathe this and stress over this. And as difficult as it was last year, it's that much more difficult this year, because as the chart, I'm pointing at where the chart was a second ago, the show is $38 million cumulatively, means everything that's gone, all the revenue that's gone, is gone. It doesn't come back, and it's compounded further. So it's like when you're in the ocean and the waves come and you think you're up, and then the next wave comes, and you're like, whoa, that second one was a big one. Before you even finish that sentence, the next wave has hit you again. And so I really want to commend you for coming up with something that does bridge that gap. One of the questions that I had for you talked about the impact on students. I just want to read something um, from Dr. Smythe's section because that she really encapsulated what this North Shore experience is. She talked about that all the goals in the department, the instructional department, are thoughtfully aligned with the North Shore journey and the North Shore shared values outcomes as we work to provide instruction of the highest quality to support deep and transferable learning, as well as to compel authentic interest and delight in learning. And then in the next page, Board of Instruction is guided by the district's why statement, inspired by our shared values and commitment to each individual whole child. We collaborate to experience and propel authentic learning, voice, agency, resilience, and continuous growth so everyone who learns, lives, and works in the North Shore community can discover their dreams and better the world. And so I thought about that one of the first times I think I've read ahead. I'm like, I did a section we weren't technically assigned. But I really thought, in light of what this means for students, that you seem to draw a distinction between students noticing a change, feeling a change, and being impacted by a change. So I'd like to hear a little more, if you could tell us if any of those statements that Carol wrote are going to be impinged by these cuts and by departments going down, and sort of the difference between students noticing, feeling, and being impacted.
Yeah, thank you. And when we wrote that why statement, it was the leadership team taking from feedback that we had gotten. We were in the Cradle of Aviation Museum for our first administrative retreat last summer, summer 22. And I think, the way Carol prefaced it too is just so speaks to the spirit of this place and what our faculty honors, what our students and parents want. But I think, that I tried to think about the level of impact on students and what they might start to notice that's changing. Of course, we started off when the LIPA deal was first made with Nassau County, that the goal, whether or not we could reach it was another story, but the goal was for students not to notice. So I think it was that year when Dr. Dolan was still here and we had a legislative evening and a student mispronounced LIPA. And I was like, yes, that's what you want. We want the adults to be savvy, but we don't want them to be worried about it, and perhaps I'm being a little dramatic. I was an elementary school principal. I worry about the little kids like they're 8, but, I do worry about them. We do think about them that way, preserving them and protecting them. But more importantly, to your point, protecting, this journey and this experience for them. So we believe with this proposed budget that is not at risk. Especially the choice and the agency and things like that. Those are the things that could start to become at risk if if deeper cuts were made. Of course, any decision that is made, we will work with the ultimate end of what you're saying is to protect that.
Marianne, do you want to go next? We'll do this side and then we'll go to this side. I try to mix it up. It's part of to be creative here.
Yes, thank you for the presentation. And I do thank you all for your hard work because I know you have done hours and hours and hours of work trying to get to this number. I am concerned about the budget passing. We passed by a very small margin the past 2 years. I think many people are much more savvy than they used to be in terms of understanding that a 4% increase could mean a 9 or a 10% increase in their real estate taxes, or less. It's somewhere in between. It doesn't equate, and I think that's part of what you have seen with the shift happening with the slimmer margins on the budget. I guess there are 2 ways to approach long-term view. What boards have done is not cut over the years. I don't think we have run as lean as we could have done historically. Um, I don't think, and some of this was inherited, so it's not directed at the present administration. But I think there were things that we should have been looking at and doing over the years that we haven't done. And while I understand the thought process of not cutting as much now because of later we'll have to do other cuts, I do think there's a flip side mentality of where if we are as lean as we really think we can be, that we are in a position to say to the community, okay, we've been very lean. We now need you to break the cap, because I think it's going to come. Really, right? It's going to come. We're going to have to break the cap, and well, maybe it won't because you'll have the revenue loss, but you're going to see a significant increase somewhere down the road, and in the not too distant future. I think I think there were further efficiencies to be found. I think we have ignored the 5 language issue. I think we've not addressed the IB issue. I mean, if you look back on the report that we had from Mr. Dr. Dragone last week, we have the numbers in those reports where we're running classes with 7 students in them, 2 students in them, 3 students in them, with IB and with foreign language. Looking at some of the enrollment data that I see here, for instance, Glen Head has 4 sections of 15 for kindergarten. Those could easily be 3 sections of 20. And there are other instances, I don't want to go into too much detail because we're not there yet on that, where you could have lesser sections in elementary school with 20 kids in it. Honestly, my kids had over 20 kids in their kindergarten class, and they still learn to read and write. If you go to Friends Academy, you get 40 kids in your kindergarten class, and you're paying for it. And I'm not advocating for 40 students. But I do think that we can be more efficient than this budget is. I will repeat what I said 2 weeks ago. I think you almost need to go building by building, and survey where we really think we could have higher efficiencies. Let's not call it cuts, higher efficiencies. And, I think a number, hovering around a little below 4% is going to be a tough sell to the community. And I would really rather that the people who are in charge of education look to see if they could strategically find more efficiencies rather than not having a passing budget and then be forced to make really dramatic cuts that we really don't want to make, because we do want to preserve the integrity of the educational experience. And I believe, having looked at the numbers, having looked at some of the programs, that we can be even more efficient than this number. So I would like to see it lowered even further. I'm sure I'm in the minority on that up here, but I may not be the minority in the community. We'll have to find out on budget day. But those are my thoughts. Maybe you've incorporated kind of the idea of reducing the number of sections eventually in here, that, when I'm looking at these numbers. So that's why I don't want to go into too much detail on it. Maybe there are plans down the road to reduce the number of foreign language offerings and to do something in terms of the IB AP dichotomy, which I think is just not cost effective with the fiscal challenges that we're facing. And we have to sort of, you know, stop the split personality going on and figure out where we want to be and what's the best for our students, and maybe achieve some cost savings. And like you said, offer another business program that people have been talking about. We need to offer, if we want to really have a real STEAM school with students going into highly competitive engineering and computer science programs, we need to have different offerings on the math and science level. Maybe engineering cost higher level math courses that we don't offer now that are really prerequisites to get into these highly competitive programs. It's not just, for me, it's personally, it's not even about the dollar amount, it's how the dollars are spent. But there are many people in our community who have lived here, who have worked here, have businesses here, have been active in the schools, have contributed their time, their energy, and their money, and they're being forced out. I mean, that is just the reality. They're being forced out, and there are families who have grown children who their children can't afford to buy in. I quite frankly don't know how anyone is doing it, and I don't even know of a $750,000 house in this community. So you know, I think we can run a little leaner. I think we have to prepare better. We have to have a clear path. I don't feel like I have a clear path of where those future savings are going to come from when we fall off that cliff in 2027. So those are my thoughts.
Left. Vice President Colasiopa.
Thank you, President McCary. Well, first of all, thank you so much for the presentation, Dr. Z, Jamie, Carol. Thank you. I know how much work went into it. Actually, I don't know. I can't even imagine how much work went into it. And you presented it so clearly, and the detail was just so helpful. Not to mention the whole budget book that we got. So, I just want to first thank you. I may have a bit of a different perspective than Trustee Russo, and I think I want to start by saying we have award-winning schools that are extremely highly ranked. And as a board, when I first joined the board and did my board training, I was told that we were not tasked with maintaining the status quo. We are tasked with improving upon our school. Even if our schools are already excellent, we are supposed to make sure that we are always striving to improve. And in this incredibly difficult budget season, I am glad to see that you are being creative and trying to find ways, like you mentioned with the business teacher, of trying to do that when it's so difficult, because we're talking about cutting and more cutting, and so I just want to thank you for keeping that in the horizon here. I also think that you planning now for 27, 28, so we don't have to break the tax cap, makes absolute sense to me. I think that the numbers are so telling. I mean, our tax levy could go up to 5.631%, and you are keeping it at 3.962%, and that also affects next year's tax levy. So our levy will probably be lower than it could be, because we are not even going to the maximum, because you are trying to shield our taxpayers. You are trying to help in as many ways as you can to make it as affordable as you can. And as you said, our tax rate is lower than so many of our neighbors. So, again, even the percent to percent increase of, what was it, 1.9% is still so low, given the amazing cuts that we have, the loss in revenue that we have. I also wanted to say that I do think that, you know, keeping elementary, I know we're going to have to increase some class sizes, but I would say in keeping elementary class sizes small should be a priority as opposed to increasing at the higher level where our students are older and can handle it better and don't need as much of that individualized attention. So I just want to say thank you for all the work that you're doing. I think that, you know, it's obvious that you are doing as much as you can to you know, shield the taxpayer from any extra burdens. And I also thought, Mr. Pappas, the slide that showed, you know, the 0.5% increase was, you know, what was it, $66 for a year, and those cuts are detrimental to us as a school district. So thank you. I did have one point of clarification on slide 18 where you talked about the instructional cuts. For instance, like the librarian that was $136,000 salary. Was that salary and benefits, or was that just salary?
I'm sorry, that is just salary
Okay.
because we continue, all districts are obligated, based on their contract, to continue paying benefits in retirement up to a certain age, Medicare eligibility age.
There are still savings in terms of pension and Social Security, but our greatest cost is the health insurance, and that continues into retirement. So it doesn't-
Okay. Thank you for clarifying that. And obviously that, you know, if we did hire a new teacher, we wouldn't be hiring at that rate. That was a seasoned employee who had worked for many years in our district.
That's
Okay.
correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for everything.
Thank you. I'll repeat the big gratitude. I know this is a day that you've been working towards since the budget passed last year, and that you've been literally thinking about how to approach this mountain of revenue losses. And so hopefully there's some relief with just kind of getting it out there and moving forward. You know, but I appreciate the work that and the thought that went into it, as did my fellow trustees. For me, you know, I sort of am synthesizing in terms of the big picture, which we're tasked to talk about at this moment, synthesizing some of the things that we learned last meeting. And, you know, our size on paper really is a detriment in that when we look at our low census, we have this high cost per student, and it is, you know, it makes us stand out in a way that seems problematic. However, you know, when we look at the tax rate and we put those things into different perspectives, you know, there's this yin yang of every asset is a liability and liability asset, in that our low size also makes our programming so impactful for so many, and that it's, again, it's this balance all the time of these cuts can be so detrimentally painful and change the trajectory of our entire, you know, I want to say infrastructure, but that's not exactly the word I'm looking for. Meaning, here's the point I'm trying to get is, for example, language. We are getting so much for our money, which is the point that I made last time when we were having that discussion about where our investments lie. Were we to make those cuts and decide, and everything's up for consideration, nothing's precious, particularly if they'll benefit the taxpayer. Like when we can make meaningful changes that will benefit the taxpayer, we are compelled to do that. However, when we kind of look at our cost and what we get for these programs, it's so minimal, our cost per taxpayer, that they won't feel it. So, for example, I'm not motivated to make changes that will hurt students that do not benefit taxpayers, is the point that I'm trying to make. So, and I do think that is a benefit of our size, in that we can have these differentiated programming because we can work across buildings, middle school, high school. We can, and I'm thinking about language when I use that example, and we can do so much for what is relatively little of an investment in their education. And it really, you know, when I think about analytically as an elected person to really think about balancing the needs of the taxpayers with the needs of the students, again, I'll repeat, nothing is precious. Nothing is without, I'll cut it, if it's up to me to do it, if they're going to be a meaningful cost benefit analysis. And so what I'm so impressed by is that you found a way to find $2.2 million, keep our budget essentially flat in the face of enormous obstacles to do that. I mean, it's 1.9% increase, but that you were able to accomplish that in this phase and also preserve programming and keep the taxpayers in mind by not going up to that, near 6%. And let's not forget that those things are built to take in consideration of the needs of the schools. And so ostensibly that's money that we need to function. And we're understanding that that is not attainable. It's not, we have heard, as has been pointed out tonight, that these are our budgets have not been passing by big margins. There is sensitivity to costs in this community. And I think it's fair that we share that burden with the taxpayer. And I think that that's something that the administration and the board has agreed upon from the beginning. So I from what I've seen tonight, I'm really encouraged that that's something that we're doing. I think that given that we know over generations and decades that these programmings have been built and maintained, we do have an obligation to protect them to the extent that we are able to for as long as we're able to. So that's all I really have to say for now. Sorry if I was making a whole lot.
Thank you. Trustee Galati.
First of all, thank you very much for the work that you did in preparing this. I know it's certainly not an easy task, and it's difficult to make a presentation regardless of where you are with it. I think that this preliminary start is a good start, but I think there are too many things that are still unknown for us right now. We don't really know. I mean, I'm not sure where we are yet in terms of staffing with the high school in terms of courses. I know we have a fixed number. We're going to have a fixed number of students. We're going to have a certain number of classes. It's just that the way the distribution works, you can perhaps get more efficiencies at that particular point in time without sacrificing programs. I'm hopeful that we're able to do that because, I agree with what most people said, and even though they're opposing points here, I think in light of the current economic situation, to keep this increase below 2% is admirable. Unfortunately, I think that regardless of what you present, we're going to have to really do a good job to convince the community that we've done everything we possibly can to make it a more efficient system and not sacrifice program in doing it. And as I said, I think as we get a little bit further into it, and I'm not asking you to rework all of this, but as we start to get more hard data in terms of what it is we actually need, I'm hopeful that we can actually find some more efficiencies in the programs, because there are certain things, and again, it's difficult in the elementary. You pretty much know where you are there. But when you get to secondary, it's still kind of in flux right now. And a couple of positions here and there that may not need to be in place. And again, I'm not advocating for accessing teachers. I'm just saying, if we can run our programs successfully, by doing it in a little leaner way, I think that would go a long way with the community. Regardless of what the numbers are, people out there, unfortunately, I shouldn't make broad generalizations, I apologize, but people tend to look at these things and they make spot judgments. Quite a few people do that. And I think, you know, and I said this to you earlier in the year, you could come in at a 0% increase and people will still complain. So, you know, I think the more that we can do to try and show that we're still working at this and trying to, again, maintain the strong academic and arts athletic programs that we have, but doing it in a way that's going to be more efficient than perhaps we're doing it now, I think that'll go a long way. So I'm cautiously optimistic. And I think that if we can see as the programs start to unfold a little bit more, if there are places that we can continue to make adjustments, I think that will go a long way, because I too am concerned about the budget passing. I have heard from many people this year that I have known for over 30 years, for the first time ever, you know, questioning what's happening. So that, to me, even though, you know, we try to reassure them, just the fact that that question is out with people who have been strong supporters for years and years and years, it worries me. So I think anything that we can do to try and, again, I'm not looking to make major cuts. I'm not looking to increase class sizes to 40. But I mean, even in the presentation that we got from Mr. Dragone, when people look at the numbers in terms of the student to faculty ratio in the district compared to other places, there are reasons that ours are lower than other places because of the kinds of programs we have, but people don't interpret it that way. They just look at it and say, we're not doing as good a job as we could be doing. And whether that's true or not, you have to really convince people and educate people to show them that we are doing everything that we possibly can.
I think that's a really good point, that if you just cherry pick a statistic or a data point, it does not tell the story. And so the onus really is on us going forward, if we make bold choices with this budget, to make sure we're able to tell the story in an effective way to the community.
President McCarry, do you mind if I just ask Rich?
Yeah, please.
I'm just curious, Rich. I think it's a great point you made, and I don't want to necessarily ask you to speculate or on the spot, and here I am, but people who have supported the way this has been going for decades, why do you think now people are starting to question that?
I think part of it is because even though these are people who have supported programs, they're not clear in terms of what the numbers actually mean. So they looked at what our percent increase was last year, and then they looked at the tax bill. And they didn't have an appreciation for the fact that because of the way the apportionments are, even though we were within what we said we were going to be, they got hit hard. And I think that's a big part of the problem. So now it's not a total lack of trust, but people are questioning now. And you really can't tell at this point in time. You don't know what that number is going to be. You're not sure. You can estimate it, but we're really not sure. So people, I think, from the people that I've been talking about, saw that happen and are like, wait a minute, I didn't expect it to go up as much as it did based upon the numbers that we saw. You know, and they were supportive, and now they're like, well, what's really happening? So I think that's a big piece of it, that you look at the data and you look at the numbers, and then when they quote unquote don't translate to your bill, even though they really do, that's where the questioning is coming from.
I have had similar comments from people who've been in the community. So even because I think this past bill last year was the first year where you really felt the shift significantly. So, I mean, my taxes went up 9%. You know, luckily I can absorb that. But even though we were under 4% last year, and I think other homeowners have had that experience. And if you look at it number wise, I mean, I'm here almost 30 years, 30. We moved in 1994, 1993. So you go from a tax bill of, $7,800 to a tax bill of 32,000, or even if you were in a little house that only had a $2,000 or $3,000 tax bill, that same little house now has a $20,000 tax bill. So, I think people still want to support the schools, but as Mr. Dragone said, like you can't eat the shingles, right? I think people are struggling, and as you live longer, and people live longer, and they retire, they've lived frugally, they have good savings, but if you live like my parents lived to 90 years old, if you live 30 years past retirement, or even 10 or 20 years, with the inflationary rate, your Social Security and your pension check have not increased along with the rate of inflation. So this is why you see like Tom Selleck selling reverse mortgages, which are a terrible idea. But you know, and people say, why would someone mortgage their house at 80 years old? Well, because they have to eat, right? And that's I think people are really feeling. I mean, we're all feeling it, right? You go to the grocery store and you come out with a bag this big, and it's $75.
Amy's was $12 today when I was out shopping.
It's crazy, right? So think if you're a senior citizen that you're living here, and even the young people who bought their house a few years ago with X number of dollars in mind for taxes and on a pretty high budget, right? They have big mortgages. The prices were high, and you know, groceries are up, taxes are up. I think it's getting harder and harder, and I don't think it's unique to us. I just think we've got the extra pressure of, as you said in your presentation, of the life shift, right? So we feel it more dramatically here. They felt it more dramatically in Northport, and these places are losing it. Plus, we are now looking at potentially with Governor Hochul a loss in state funding, right? Which is state aid, which is also going to have a bigger impact on people going forward in the budgets. So I don't think it's that people aren't supportive of the schools or of the district or are unhappy with their child's experience. I just think it's financial, like everything else, it's financial pressures.
One of the things, first of all, I appreciate that feedback from both of you. School budgets, we can't all vote on the price of a jar of mayonnaise. We can't all vote on the price of our health care.
I should add, I did not buy it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Regardless, but we do get to vote on this. So this is in many ways an opportunity to say, I've had it and I don't want to do this anymore, and something has to stop. And so I think that's kind of driven by what you talk about. And as our rates, I mean, that slide that you've shown showing our taxable home value, as we normalize to these neighboring communities, because we don't have the benefit of LIPA paying the tab anymore, we're feeling it even more. So the bargain we used to have in this community is certainly becoming much less of a bargain. I live in Glenwood Landing, so there are $750,000 and less homes
I think I closed one.
well, regardless, you're always welcome, Marianne. We'll take the dogs for a walk. I'll show you around. But I think that part of this, Rich, to your point, is at least explaining the facts on why people's taxes are going up. That it is based on those other things. Because I looked at the price of my home, and I only went up about 2.7%. And we have an investment property in town, and they went up less than 2%. Now, I haven't done anything to those properties. I haven't built pools or dormers or whatnot, and I never grieved. So I never had to normalize back from that lost grievance. I've always just sort of paid the taxes on my more modest. I mean, I also want a business in South Carolina, so the idea of a modest home, maybe being under $750,000 is ridiculous. Although they're not staying at 200,000 in South Carolina anymore either. But I think helping to explain the math of how this does, as the administration has done really well through these presentations and through your outreach efforts, is a good way, because the frustration we all feel at taxes, at mayonnaise, at cars, at insurance that we pay, is real. And this is the only opportunity we get to really have a voice in that. But the second element, which is the mistrust, people talk about, the board voted to raise my taxes above the community's will. We all know that's hogwash. But I assume everyone on the board agrees that's hogwash. But that's out there, and I think that also builds distrust. And so the more that we and the more the administration really, sorry, Chris, it's on you guys also a lot, also because you have the pulpit, can try to build that trust through facts. Marion talks about those really small class sizes, and that's something that is under your microscope at the high school level. And I don't personally think that's a bad thing. I think I've talked about it on this dais before. Staggering the offerings, limiting the way the classes are offered, the timing of the classes is there. But thinking about what the savings would be for a lost language, or for making that selection between IB and AP, which is a decision that the community has wrestled with from an academic perspective. But I think to talk about it and what the actual costs are, when we bring it to dollars and cents and numbers, I think that is how we begin to rebuild that trust. Which, by the way, I'm sorry, I think plenty of the community does still trust this board and this district. They send their kids here, they participate in our events, and they're integrated with our schools throughout.
I'm sorry. I'm just listening to such a great conversation. One thing I wanted to say in the presentation is, and I hope this doesn't come across as too simplistic, but it is, the goal when we started in August was 0%. And what is so challenging is it's like shoveling snow when it's snowing. These and I can understand how that's not clear to the community, because the night shift bill, a $1.5 million increase this year alone, it was more last year. And so to get to neutralize that night shift increase is 12 teachers. That's what's so hard. So like if we just didn't have that, or the LIPA loss, or didn't have one of these things, even if we had just the night shift increase that all districts have, it would just be much easier to control. So it's the amount of cutting that you need to do to first clear the first hurdle of inflation that a district faces, and then to go further to handle LIPA, and then to go further to go down because of the shift. That's so it's those three hurdles that are increasingly hard. And that's, again, it's not an excuse, but just that's kind of what we're dealing with.
We've spoken about a lot of things here, and it is hard to live on Long Island. It's hard to live in New York. And I'm going to be frank, sometimes I feel uncomfortable now that my child is older and, getting close to graduating from this district, talking about radically changing what the experience is for little kids. I feel uncomfortable being in a position where we might make decisions that deprive children from programs that our kids benefited from. And so that for me, makes me think of the timing of these cuts, right? Many of these LIPA conversations have been going on over a decade, and there were boards before us who tried their hardest to not cut programs too early. And our kids really benefited from that. And I want to keep that in mind. I want to appreciate that and sort of aspire to be that, so that we're a board who's able to keep these programs in place for another generation of students for as long as possible, particularly given how hard it is for their parents to afford houses here. I want them to feel as if they're getting value for their dollar like we have for our own kids. As we've spoken about, 3.962 is really just a starting point, and that I guess I'm curious what the program would look like if we went to the cap. I don't know if you want to answer that, if you have any ideas.
I think if it's okay, I think that's good. And kind of going back to the conversation before, we are getting the course request numbers in, for example, like Trustee Galati was referring to, just Ms. Imperial, Mr. Doherty and I were just talking about that yesterday. I think giving more of a fine grade analysis along with some of the electives, IB, which I promised at the last meeting, I'll put in my next update, like what those trade-offs would actually look like in terms of seats in a class and things like that. We'll provide that to you for our next update.
Okay. And then I'm curious on the other end, and I know you touched on it tonight, what would the program look like if we went below your 3.962?
And I think that is where it would be, I think there would be options that we would need to change, in terms of courses offered, in terms of electives that students have, things like that. But still there too, I would look at the trade-off between class size and program, which seems to be what keeps coming up as we look at cuts. So we'll provide that as well.
All right. So now I think we got our big picture stuff covered. Let's see if we can answer any questions as we go through the book. Hold on, I just got logged out here. So I'm assuming we kind of covered section A to 1, pages 1 through 3, unless anybody has something to add. Okay, enrollment, section C. And again, if you're at home, you can look along. My question was actually the same that Marianne had about those 4 sections of 15. I believe they were in Glen Head.
Yes, it's Glen Head.
Grade 1.
First grade. Yep.
First grade.
Well, they're kindergarten now. They'll be first grade next year.
Right. Yeah.
That's
Rising
why
first.
I said I think we actually lost one child already from that. So I think we have 3 of 15 and 1 of 14. But it's not just there. There was a third grade that I thought could be 20. And as you go up, it's really easier to make the class size bigger. But 20 is still, it is like private school. It really is.
Depends on the private school. All right, go ahead.
Something the superintendent and I have in common is that we both ran softball leagues. So the idea of divvying up girls into the teams, this is something we have experience in. Mary and I counted even more than you. I got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, not counting incoming kindergartens, that if we condensed would have 25 or less, 8 of them.
I got 6, so you're ahead of me.
Well, yeah, maybe. Yeah,
I got 6 positions that could be eliminated if we went. I didn't go over 25. That's where the difference is. I stayed under. I think contractually, we have to be 24 at the or maybe it's 25.
At Glen Head, the first grade is 4 15s, could be 3 20s. The incoming fifth grade is a 15, 17, 18, 19, could become 3 23s. Glenwood Landing, I have 3 21s, 3 23s, 3 25s, 3 23s, and then 1 at Seacliff. I do think that is a difference from what kids have had into President McCarry's. I mean, you're right. Certainly, nothing need me to tell you this, but not to answer the question on the fly, of course, Dr. Z. But the question of what it would look like, that's certainly one of those things. And I think, those are the changes that I think as a community, when they come out and vote, we have to think we could go in that direction. I mean, this is a community vote. This is what the community decides they want the future of their schools and their elementary schools to be. And if people think it's the right direction for North Shore to have elementary school classes in 23, 24, 25, then that can be done. That's got to be what a contingency would look like, I would imagine.
That's exactly why we're having these meetings in March, and we kind of got that idea from the fall meetings, where that's a question. Would that be a better choice than eliminating a language, eliminating certain electives, or every other alternating electives? So getting feedback on those decision matrices.
More than raising taxes.
There was a pretty significant period of time when kids went through the bubble. So when Katie was in kindergarten, right, there were 19 kids in her kindergarten class. And Mikey had either 21 or 23. I forget 3 years later how many. But as Katie went through the school and Mikey went through the school, their elementary class sizes became larger. Not because they went up in grades, just because we just got that many more families in the district. So they, on average, probably had 23, 24 kids in their elementary class. And I didn't, I mean, so it's not unprecedented. I think we've just been a little spoiled by the lower enrollment numbers that have made the class sizes smaller. So, Dr. Dragone talked about the Princeton plan where you would, combine the grades. And I mean, I think that would be really shocking to the community. But I don't think having 20 or 21, I didn't even go above 23 in these numbers. I kept it below 23. And there could be 6 teaching positions eliminated at the elementary level alone, keeping the class sizes under 23, understanding that these are little kids. I do think there may be some exceptions where you wouldn't even want to go to 23 based upon the composition of the class. But just looking at it, I think this is an area where we can look, and I don't think it would harm the student. A very small class size. And below the Nassau County average, by the way, which is what, 25?
Actually, I have a whole study. I can share that with you. And Joe Dragone referenced that, the NIS study. It depends on the grade level. And depending on the grade level, North Shore is lower, further below the average, tends to be smaller, but it depends on the grade level.
His report showed us the window of class size is a little shifted. I only got 2 for under 23. There's a lot of at 23s. Because I'm going to maybe put a little plug in for you're going to be meeting with elementary school parents at some point in your budget tours.
That's right. Yeah.
I would be curious to hear what the feedback is from elementary school parents, because maybe they would like, maybe it's fine. They prefer, to be in bigger classes or to save,
The mayonnaise.
yeah, buy the mayonnaise, extra mayonnaise.
I think it will. I think I do agree that meeting will be a really interesting one. You did do, Chris, if I remember correctly, you did an elementary. It was here.
That's right. Yeah.
A year ago, I think. Wasn't it last year, or was it only in the fall?
We had one in the fall.
Okay.
And we got into that. We actually started to get into. It was a really robust conversation about that versus FLES and things like that. Yeah.
So I mean, I think with the stronger numbers that we have in front of us now, repeating that conversation in that meeting, it was very interesting. There was a parent, a North Shore parent, who was a teacher in another district. I'm sure you remember. You probably have it in your notes. And she spoke incredibly passionately about the difficulties of moving to larger class sizes in the elementary levels. So it's just, I'm not putting that out there as as an argument against, except that these are the types of people I think we need to hear more from.
Except-
and it will be even more compelling this year to hear, because it is startling to think about that these are changes that look very almost like low hanging fruit. I'm really eager I'll be here for that.
Except to ask a parent if they'd rather have 15 kids in their child's kindergarten class, or 21 or 22 or 23. It's like asking a kid if they want spinach and dessert or 2 desserts. I mean, we all want what we want, but the reality is having 20, 21, 22, 23 kids in your elementary class is not, it's not going to keep the kid out of Harvard. All right. It's not some tragedy. They will learn with 23 kids in the class. Maybe you need to put in an extra aid. Maybe some classes can't be 23, like I said, because of the composition. But as a general rule, I think if you went almost anywhere and said you're going to have 20 kids in your elementary class, people would be parents would be delighted.
I think you do everybody raises a good point that these decisions need to be evidence-based, right? Hattie has done lots of research on class size correlations and the effectiveness of that. But I think as we look at neighboring districts, we have to keep in mind that our special education rates are much higher than the other neighboring districts. So what might be comfortable for one district who has a lower special education rate might not be applicable to us going forward. And I do like the idea that everybody learns to read or write. There's a luxury in saying that, because I don't think that's true for every kid. There are lots of kids who still, when they graduate, are struggling with basic skills. And I'd be, whether class size is a function of that or not, or contributing factor to that, I'm not sure. Go ahead. Somebody Dave.
My point was just this is a really good conversation, and it's good to hear all the different input. I would say, I guess, as a reminder to us, but also to the community as well, that of course what we're doing up here is the corporate model, where we are an elected board that advises and says lots of things. I'm sure but you are, and we trust in you to be able to synthesize all this, to choose what's best for our students with this input that will work for this community. But in terms of what's best for students and what's not best for students, I certainly don't know what the ideal size is for those kids. But I do have that trust in you, Dr. Z, to be able to synthesize all this.
Thank you so much. I think I do want to say, and I think the discussion has kind of pointed to the need for more analysis, the need for more real numbers, what it would look like, certain decisions, what that impact would be. And, just to go back to the softball team analogy, the last number you want is 20 softball players for 2 teams, or 19 for 2 teams. It's where those cutoffs are. And just in speaking with the principals even this week about this, because we are talking about it, the student behaviors, special education needs, and how that impacts cohorts. For example, there are a couple of grade levels where we have 2 ICT classes that are actually at state mandated capacity. So there are some of those factors there that we look at, and that's what I can provide more of.
Any other questions about enrollment? Okay, we'll move to efficiencies. Wasn't a page associated with it.
We had added that last year just as a topic, because it was last year's when we started making more cuts. So I apologize for that.
Covered that in the first section.
All right.
For me.
Fund balance. I had a question. So as we tighten up the budget, right? really at the end of the year, we're going to have less fund balance to apply. And so it becomes even harder, right, to fund next year's budget.
The hope is, and as we go through this, we start tightening our belts now. We start, and we have all year long, but we start to say, you know, no more spending after a certain time. Let's slow it, you know, keep an extra hard eye on overtime. We hope to have money at the end of the year, maybe even to replenish some of the use of our reserves for the coming year. We were able to do that last year. But it is definitely something we have to keep an eye on, because once it's gone, if you can't replenish it, it's gone. And if you become dependent on it, it becomes a problem.
And if I remember correctly, we're actually very, very good at having a proposed budget that comes very, very close to the actual budget, right? So to begin with, we don't have a lot of fund balance left over.
It's you know, when we look at $1.2 million being left over, that's less than 1%. You know, we're right around 1% of a savings. So that means we're that close in terms of estimating and putting our budget out there and what we were able to put back into our reserves. So yes.
I do think going forward, which is not right now, but I guess it happens more over the summer, for next year, as contracts are coming in, right? I really feel we have to send the contracts back asking for a reduction in what is being charged, like just our standard operating procedure. Because if we are under this fiscal stress and people want to do business with us, I think it's important that they also share to some extent in the hit.
Talking about collectively bargained contracts.
Oh, no, I'm talking about outside contractors.
Got it.
Maria?
Yeah, it was just because it was, I'm sorry, it was just relevant to the specific question you were asking, and Jamie was answering about fund balance. It's not technically in the fund balance section, but I had a question. You talk about it in the revenue section, actually, but I'm seeing, so if I'm, sorry, I have to get better at this. Okay. That's okay. That's okay. What? Yeah. Or maybe only bring those sections on those nights. So I'm looking at. It's actually your interoffice memorandum. It's, I don't know. I'm trying to. It's the first page in the in section F. You talk about fund balance being 1.250, I think. And if I'm reading this correctly, in fact, you at the moment estimate that we will be returning all of that to the taxpayers. There will be none of it available for replenishing reserves.
And when we do our projections, they are conservative in nature. So we hope that they are better than what they are. But I believe that we will end up with that to put back.
Okay.
So yes.
But we're not right. We're not projecting at this time, in this moment in time, though, that we would be able to replenish any of the reserves, which we are in fact going to use.
And we have been able
revenues.
to, and we are seeing some increases in revenues and other things. So we are hopeful that we will be able to do that. But I
Right.
can't say at this early stage that that's a guarantee.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, please.
On that very specific point, could that I'm remember in my limited years so far on this board, you know, one of the things that's another big moment in our year is our audit and our credit rating. And I've heard the auditors say on numerous occasions that our highly regarded management of our reserves, in fact, contributes to a very good credit rating. And I'm wondering if we are not able to replenish the reserves at all, or to only to a very low amount, if in your experience that could in fact affect our credit rating, which would then affect our borrowing rates going forward. Right?
It does have a bearing on your credit rating. It also has a bearing on the fiscal stress scores that schools have. So you may have healthy reserves, but if they say, well, they were really healthy 2 years ago, and now they're healthy, but they're not as healthy. They look at that and say, well, your reserves have come down a little bit, and you get 2 points towards your fiscal score for that. And if you get over 10 points, well, now they say you're fiscally stressed. So it does have a bearing on how you're perceived, whether it's true or not, because it's, one office says you can't have more than 4%, and the other office says, wow, they have 8%, they're doing really great. So, it's how they talk to each other in terms of the different departments and what they, feel is important.
I went to the website to get this information. It's publicly available. It's all up there. You go under BOE, and then there's a status of reserves. Can't do it, just Control F, type in reserves, says it right there, status of reserves. I want to confirm that the status of reserves as of June 30th, 2023 is the last officially audited posting and numbers that we have that we can hang our hats on.
Yes.
Okay. And that was, we talk about fund balance, but really we're talking, there's two things we were talking about. The 1.25 million is really overage from unspent money from the budgets. The overall status of reserves, which are in things ranging from workers' comp reserve to TRS to ERS to capital reserves, et cetera, is $14,776,203. That was the number.
That's correct.
Okay. Yes. So so I'm going to round up $15,000. Sorry, 50. Good. Maybe very stressed. We have 15,000. 15 million total restricted fund balance, of which 560 was used to offset this year's levy. So we're about 14.5 million. And then, of course, we have the unrestricted reserve of about 4.8 million, which is up to 4%.
Yes.
Audited at the 4% level, not over. And so I just want to go through what you're proposing, make sure I understand it properly, and just reinforce what was presented on the screen. From current year's operations, there's the estimate of 1.25 million, which was my question, Maria's. That's about what you think we will have. If we end, I'm not going to ask that question. It's too hypothetical. From the ERS reserve, you're proposing we would use 750,000. From TRS, a teacher's reserve system, 500,000. From the LIPA settlement that we negotiated and adopted, you're proposing we use 1.25 million. I want to be sure I understand. That is everything we've received so far, with 500 more to go to be received, or that's it? It's all gone.
That's it.
So that's it. That's using all of it in one fell swoop. Okay. So that's where all that's coming from. That's the alternative to changing that, one alternative to changing that 3.962 number. When we talked about, and certainly as I had, previous times gone around the community talking about the paths to a solution for this LIPA situation, we're hitting all the marks. It's cuts, it's taxes, it's reserves, it's efficiencies, it's government assistance. That's what we were looking to do. Guess the question for me under this point would be whether using those reserves versus what that extra taxing could look like is at least, I think, a valid question for this board at this time and in the coming weeks. Because any dollar matters. No one wants tuna without mayo. Some people do, but
I do.
I don't know. I don't.
That's why I left it on the shelf.
A lot of talk
Clearly.
about mayonnaise tonight.
That's why you're nice and cool in this room, and I'm like throwing my sweater off. But the point is, when you also look at $65 a year, you can't even. I don't know how this became the analogy, but you can't even buy mayonnaise for that once a month. So I think when it comes down to what those numbers are, it's important to think about the actual impact and of sacrificing the ability to have reserves for future losses of 8.4 million, because I don't ever see this. This community has the lowest passing rate of any community on the island, other than the ones that have gone across the tax cap. I don't see us passing tax caps and having an appeal to the community and being able to say, hey guys, no, this time it's really serious. That doesn't seem to be realistic to me. So reserves are a path to being able to look at that in the future. So I do feel strongly with this amount of reserves being used, I'm certainly not at this point, as Trustee Galati said, it's premature to really go anywhere directly because maybe additional cuts or efficiencies could be a path as well. But I think the trade-off between using reserves and potentially looking at a different tax number is something to at least consider as we go forward. That's why we're here.
Anybody else? Okay. Okay.
Sorry, I did. I also had the same comments about reserves, so and Dave said it much better than I would have. So, I did have a question. Where is it? Page 9 of 23 in the in Jamie's section, where it talks about insurance. And this just, I know I've been doing this for 3 years now, but it still boggles my mind that from 2013 to 2024, there was a 50% increase, right? Am I reading this correctly in insurance? I mean, this is not even close to inflation at all. It's 9 out of it. I mean, why aren't more people complaining about this? I mean, I understand like people, having issues with their taxes going up. I have issues with the insurance going up by this much. I mean, is there something that collectively we can do I mean, we are in a collective, right, with all of the other school districts. Like, is NYCHA considered? Yeah, right. So it's unfathomable that these insurance companies can charge this much when we are facing such horrible fiscal pressures right now, or I mean, just the past 10 years, it's unbelievable. What can we do? Is there anything we can do?
And even more so in the last 2 or 3
2
years,
years,
where
yeah,
we've really
yeah.
seen him almost 15% last year,
I mean,
10% looking to next year. That's 25% just in 2 years. But there aren't a lot of alternatives. It's a question where maybe they could support that system in terms of lowering health insurance, not only for schools, but for all that are part of the NYCHA program. But I don't, we're almost at their mercy. Similar with regular insurance, which has gone up considerably in the last couple of years. And even when we've looked at other carriers, we're right there. What we know with NYSER, which is our regular insurance carrier, they're very responsive when we have a problem when it is. So everyone I speak to says, well, you wouldn't want to change that. They're same cost, but less service. But these are both areas.
Getting the coverage in the private sector that you're getting here. And I bid these out for fun. So, yeah, it's all over.
And everyone should know you worked in the insurance industry. Yeah.
Well, I own my own company, 10, 12%. And, and in South Carolina, there's loss ratios. We have a healthy population. That's just what they do.
And then they don't cover it. You have to fight for coverage for every drug, for every procedure. You get a bill for $125,000. Oh, you should have checked yourself out of the hospital. Thank you. Thanks for charging me.
A lot of it goes back to defensive medicine, which doctors are practicing, where they're obviously over testing, scheduling lots of exams that aren't necessary, and that raises our costs. But that's my own belief. Okay. Any other thing on fund balance? Revenue projections, section F, our final area for the night.
Not just fund balance. Revenue. I have maybe a smallish question on from the revenue section. I was just curious. It has felt really painful. We've talked about it quite a bit. The loss of the Gorin, the Bullet grant and aid. I hadn't quite absorbed until I was reading this section that other districts had been beneficiaries of that as well. And I was really just curious if they too had experienced reductions the way we have.
Yeah, and I would have to do a little more research on this, but I can just speak to the state aid runs after the legislative budget last year because we really dug into that. And yeah, Long Island really did not get that Gorin grant that, like, I think Northport and those districts have gotten was gone. There were some districts, Stony Point and Haverstraw, upstate, that were more Indian Point districts. They received something, but it really does break down to who's in the majority in Albany, and we're trying to work around that. We're working with both Assemblyman Levine, Senator Martins, and with our lobbyist to try and work around that as much as we can.
Yep, I'm sorry. I was mumbling to Andrea that I have a few more questions in this section. So on the page that talks about the variance, I noted a note here. When we're projecting out through 28, 29, you do make a point of saying that these projections are really don't have any exclusions in their they don't take into account the use of exclusions because there's no way to know what they are. They're only defined every year based on the year before. But so I think the point I wanted to make here, and it kind of goes back to that long-term view that I think is so valuable that you're taking, is that we have put a lot of irons in the fire to hoping that, working towards getting new revenue streams, towards working with the state. You had some incredibly hopeful news from Albany for the first time, despite the the deficit that the state is facing. Two of the senators you spoke to recognize what the losses are translating to for us, what the potential is for hitting our program and our faculty. The efforts that you referred to that LAC is making, the possibilities for new revenues from new power supply sources on the land that can't be used in any other way right now. To me, those are another, that's just another example of, it's an overall view, but the power of this budget getting us so well to a manageable place for another year, to give those efforts another year to percolate, hopefully to maybe come to some kind of fruition. I just wanted to point that out, that it's so easy. It's such a small note, that footnote, but it's a really significant one given what our picture looks like. So I just wanted to emphasize that. Okay, while we're still in. Okay, I wanted to just ask, and this touches back on the other section, but it's here as well. Could we just talk very briefly again about the question of borrowing, even despite what we just talked about in terms of reserves, the idea of borrowing from our own reserves rather than paying fees that are incurred when we do TAN and BAN borrowing. Is there, and that the trade-off between what we lose in the interest we pay on those and what we gain in the interest we earn. I just kind of wanted to get my own bearings again on whether we think it's worth moving forward with that effort.
Definitely a savings if we could borrow from borrow from ourselves instead of getting the TAN. But there is a benefit in taking, which are why many districts do, taking out those TANs, because you are not taking your own money out of your reserves and they're continuing to grow and gain interest. So you have to factor in the interest that you're getting, which kind of offsets the interest you're paying on that TAN. But overall, because there are also fees involved, attorney's fees, the financial advisor fees that prepare all the statements. So there are fees that are also involved in that you're paying with a TAN.
I'm about to get out of my league with this next question, but wouldn't you also potentially structure it so that if you were borrowing from your own reserves, though you're taking that money out and therefore losing the interest on it, you'd be paying yourself interest. Isn't that one way to that you're even? I mean, it's something that
I believe what they would want you to do is pay interest to that reserve as
Right.
if you would. So you
As
would
if
also
it
have
was
to be
earning
paying
that
that as well,
right.
to
Right.
make the reserve whole of what it would have earned if you had not taken
Right.
it out.
Right. It still feels like it would be a net gain because you're no longer paying the interest to another bank. You're paying it to your own reserves.
You're making the reserve whole.
Right. Right. Okay. So I guess what I'm thinking about in terms of the efforts that we're managing. Do you think it's worth putting continued effort into trying to get the ability, at least having approval to borrow from your own reserves, whether or not, I mean, it doesn't force us to use it, right? It just puts another tool in our toolkit.
And I do know that ASBO and they are working on that too. So it is still definitely a very good area to concentrate on, and something that other districts are also still continue to look into. Nobody's given up on it. So yes, I do believe it is still a place for effort.
But it's a bit of a holding pattern at the moment. We just kind of have to wait. Okay. I also wanted to ask, I'm still, I think, revenue projections. I'm just noticing, and I guess we'll talk about this one in more detail when we go through the line by lines, but this was one that I've been curious about for the past few years. It looks, from what I'm seeing, it happens to be page 17 where I noticed it in the 5-year budget plan, but it looks like you are budgeting for a new bus every year. I'm just curious if that's just something that you are hoping to do. We haven't bought a new bus the past couple of years, but
We have not. We do
Right.
have 2 newer buses, or 3. One because of an accident that it was replaced.
Yep.
One which we purchased for to transport a student last year, so we could bring that in house, and one new one. But we haven't bought a bus in a number of years, and that continues to be in there because at some point we are going to have to address the electric bus, the purchase of electric buses, or even not the replacement of buses
Right.
that are now 20, close to 20 years old.
okay. Thanks, Jamie. Appreciate that.
To clarify, when you say address, we're going to have to, because there is a state, who knows where it will end up, but there's currently a state mandate with a year that all districts are going to have to do that.
Correct. Yes.
Other questions? This is the final, right? Go ahead.
I think this is a pretty quick question. So, Jamie, I wonder if you wouldn't mind, the page it's a couple in, it doesn't have a number, in the 5-year projections that starts with the variance. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just talking through, and this I think speaks more to the projected losses, the potential for projected losses from the peaker station, that 8 million, but it's graduated in a way that I'm not super crystal clear on. And I wonder, to Trustee Ludmar's point about our use of reserves and how, not that we have to have a full clear picture of how we would address a big loss like that in a few years, but it seems like it's part of your thinking. So maybe you could take us through.
The way the schedule works is we've calculated out what the increase in expenses are over the next 5 years based on roughly 3 or 4% for salaries, how insurance has been going up, and coming to what the expenses would be for each of those years. On the revenue portion of it, it's very hard to tell, other than for going to the limits that we know, which mean 2% on taxes or increase in insurance. So that's really the difference between there. I didn't take into account the loss of the peaking stations. That's really where we see expenses rising and what we would expect the revenues to be. And it's been very similar for the past couple of years in terms of we've managed to not be in that place because there are usually the revenue scenario is usually better than what is pictured here. But this is a very conservative on the revenues and very high on the expenditures so that we can plan accordingly.
Do you maybe like list a few examples of some of the potential revenue losses that are like that take us so far into the red on here? I didn't ask this in advance, and so I don't want to put you too far on the spot if it's not a possibility, but just it seems to kind of dive, right? Like from 24 to 25, and then it takes a 4 million, 7 million, 8.5, 9.5 in the variance.
You know what, why don't we, you can always come back to us on that. You could ask next week.
I should have submitted.
That's fine, and I'll address it if I don't. I'll address it in my my update, but
sorry.
at least, and then I can speak about it at the next meeting, just so I can.
My sincere
I don't want
apologies for
to.
putting
No,
you on the
I don't
spot
want to
like that.
misstate something.
No,
Okay.
no, we don't want
without
that.
having it.
I just have one quick idea on that, especially if we go to 25 to 26, because we're not expecting the 27 to 28 outside of this model. That is the first school year that we could feel the end of the Nassau County LIPA. There would be, thinking there might not be that 5-year extension that the county agreement talks about. So that's the 8.4 million that we'd be getting for the next 3 years would stop. The other thing is, though, what we've been talking about, it's actually a good connection to the prior conversation, and that is we're using reserves. We're using the remainder of the LIPA reserve. We won't have that. So there's a revenue hole. So that dip looks like kind of like a $1.5 million dip into 25, 26. We don't have that reserve to tap into. So we have a little bit of a revenue hole, and that might be part of it. But we'll get more specific.
Look, you want to say something, Jamie?
I was looking at the revenue line above the 31 million and going across there and trying to, but you're talking about the variances at the bottom, and that is the difference between what we would need in taxes to fund the next budget, and the number underneath that is what our maximum tax levy would be if we were held at only a 2% cap. So that's the variance at the bottom.
Thank you. Thanks
Sorry.
so much.
I was looking at the wrong line, so I couldn't. I apologize.
Oh, I apologize. Mutual Apology Association.
Well, everybody in the audience, everyone listening should know the trustees and the administration are going into hour 4 of the meeting. So we start at 6:30. So to miss a line makes sense. And if you stick around, we'll be missing a lot more lines. Okay. Comments from the public. I will now open up the floor. Please state your name and town of residence.
Mazzella, Glenhead. I was just curious what the board's position was regarding the lithium battery storage plants. Other school districts, like Sachem in particular, is filing suit, trying to stop the building of a site near one of their schools. To my knowledge, there's a 1-mile evacuation zone around the storage site if there is a fire. This building would be well within that evacuation range. The Sachem district has taken the position that they're trying to protect their students and staff from the potential dangers of such exposure. So I was curious if this board had any plans to oppose the building of the storage facility down in Glenwood Lane.
This board has not taken a position on that. We're just really gathering more information. Would you agree? Or?
Yeah, we are doing research on it, to be honest with you, to see, to find out those facts about that. We do know on the one hand that those developers are looking for communities because of communities like Sachem and their reaction. They're looking for communities that would be open to development. So that is something that certainly once we have more information, we would discuss that. That would be discussed publicly.
The evacuation zone is of particular concern. I think should be of particular concern to anybody sending children here in particular. I'm not quite sure if the middle school and the high school would fall into that. It's close, just on the map, but from a radius point of view, it might also be within the evacuation zone. So these are things I think you guys need to consider, because if you have to evacuate multiple buildings, where are you going to basically conduct the business of education? If they did go ahead and build this facility, again, to my knowledge, what would be happening is they would be tapping into National Grid's infrastructure at the old Glenwood Landing site to provide energy, I guess, I believe, to the South Shore is what they were talking about, primarily Long Island, but that's neither here nor there. But if that were to happen, it would, in essence, become a power producing property once again. And again, would the board at that point push for a reassessment on the valuation of that? They got their taxes lowered because they're not producing power. If this thing goes through, they would be. So just again, something to keep in mind as you go forward. Just another thing in terms of the pilots, and I've been kind of talking about that looming problem for years now. Again, I would hope the board would consider things in terms of future contract negotiations where that would start in 2027 when these pilots go away. Just for instance, what would a 1% increase in employee contributions to benefits do to offset some of the revenue loss? I believe our current employee contribution rate is on the low side for Nassau County in general. On the education side, definitely low when you go to private business. But again, that's not really relative, I think, compared to other educational institutions. Just something to look into. How much money could we gain and ship away without impacting programs? So just some food for thought.
Thank you. Just to clarify, we have compared our district's employees' contributions to other neighboring districts. And if I remember correctly, we were pretty much in the middle. Is that correct?
Yeah, that is the 20% is kind of like the average, but we are. I'll just say we're looking at all options, and in addition, I just wanted to mention, we are looking to do research on, the IDA whenever there's development and meeting with, utilities to try and get more information. So I'd just say we're in the research phase right now.
Any other public comments? Make sure you speak into the mic and name and town of residence. No.
Hello?
There you go.
Okay. Hello, my name is Taylor Herslick. I'm a reporter with Blank Slate Media, but I do actually live in this district, so it's nice to learn some more about it. But I'm just wondering how many students are currently enrolled across the district?
2,513? Hold on.
Report, but just
Sounds right.
slightly
If
over
I'm wrong,
2,500
That's Mr.
students.
Gone report. I think it was 2513.
Just back up. I'll look at it while you're.
Any other questions?
That's it.
All right.
Thank
What was your
you.
town of residence? You didn't tell us.
I'm in Glen Head.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for
Thank you
coming.
for your time.
2,528.
Ah,
I'm looking at it.
but if it was Price or Right,
Yeah,
I didn't go over.
Mike Conklin, Greenvale. Been a district resident since 2003. I just have one quick thing for the gentleman that spoke a moment ago, because I have an emergency response guide on my phone. That distance is 1/3 of a mile, not 1 mile. I looked it up immediately when you said it. Okay, the evacuation zone. Dr. Z and the board, thank you all for the presentation and all the added comments afterwards. I don't think the community is expecting you to solve the issues of affordable housing and inflation. They're not unique to us. I know we will discuss them, but I think we're looking for the board and our management to manage the district's money like you would your own. Taking into account the uniqueness of our situation. And I think we're all aware it's not going to be easy. Our world, it doesn't stand still. For my family, in 2028, my last child is going to graduate from the school district. And between now and then, there's zero chance I would vote down a budget. But once he graduates, the Conklins are going to have to take a serious look at if we'll stay in the district. Downsizing to stretch retirement monies is a reality for all people. A 6-bedroom, 3-bath house is not necessary for empty nesters. We love this community and the North Shore School District, but making monies stretch longer, it's just something that everybody has to face at some time, unless you're extremely wealthy. With that said, I do have one question. Do we know which school district is most comparable to ours, where 84% of their income is derived from private dwellings? Because that's what it sounded like. About 84% of our income comes from private dwelling taxation. What school district nearest us would that be? Is it Roslyn, Jericho, Locust Valley, Cold Spring Harbor? If we have that information, I would love to know it at some point in time. Thank you for your time.
It's hard. We don't always have easy access to the adjusted base proportions of other districts. It's something Jamie and I have talked a lot about. One thing I'll put out there is the East Wilson district is mostly residential, and that's kind of just like a rough estimate. But we'll try, and I think that's good information to look at.
Any other public comments?
Hello. I have kind of two questions. One is macro and one slightly more
Name and
granular.
town of residence.
Sorry. Clay Hunt, Old Brookville. First, I'd like to thank the last speaker. I echo his thoughts. Been here same amount of time, and 6 bedrooms is probably more than I need soon.
Mm-hmm.
Macro-wise, I don't know the names of the various speakers. I think it was Maria who said early on that she said the 2028 cliff was, to quote, potential, and also that there was uncertainty around the number. So I wanted to get a little bit more understanding of the clarity or lack thereof in that number. I may have been partially addressed when you said that there is a possibility of LIPA and a 5-year extension of pilot payments, perhaps. So I'm gathering that those two may be mixed and there may be more. And if that does address it, is that document publicly available? And where would I find it? That's the macro level questions. The granular, more granular is, have you guys done the projections with regards to the potential number of new homes to be constructed on those 2 golf courses? And obviously there's a lot of fluctuation in terms of zoning, et cetera, but what, given a low projection and a high projection, where those numbers might pan out and how they might address the shortfall. Thanks very much.
Great questions. Thank you. In terms of the 2027-2028 cliff, the Nassau County agreement with LIPA from June of 2022 had structured payments for each of the affected districts, including us, Island Park, Oceanside. And at the end of the 2027 year, there's a clause in that agreement that talks about a possible 5-year extension. That extension would only happen if the power supply agreement was renewed. The power supply agreement would only be renewed if power was being generated. We are hearing increasingly, we need to do more research on this, that power will not be generated from there, unless, of course, there are other things that come about, like some of these other speakers mentioned, like battery storage, wind, things like that. So we do have more research to do on that, and there's a lot unknown, but we have a little time to figure that out. That document should be publicly discoverable through the county at this point. The other
The FOIL request.
yeah, that might FOIL request might be necessary for that through Nassau County. No, it's not our document. That's it's a settlement document from the county. It might be available online. I don't know. Yeah.
So I need you to go back to the mic. I'm sorry, because otherwise you're not picked up on the live stream.
So my earlier question was whether or not you, the board, and the directors of the school district, et cetera, have an actual copy. Your answer was no. It's wherever it is, NASA at the county level, a settlement agreement. But I would think that, for example, you would want to know how the term used, power generating, is defined, right? So it could be defined in a lot of different ways, just that big term alone. So it'd be interesting to know. I'd love to go through a legal document to be able to pull it apart. And if I have to go through a FOIA request, I'm probably not going to do that.
Yeah, let me do research to see the extent to which that is something that could be, publicly found, publicly shared.
And everyone here pretty much voiced the concern about trying to present to the public who's going to vote on the budget.
Right.
You guys have done everything possible. To me, that seems like that would be that's where you would start to explain. So we've gone through this document. We've read it in detail. We understand exactly what it's saying. Here are the possibilities. This is what we're looking at. Here are the projections from bad to fine or better. So that would build a lot of credibility, I would guess.
Yeah,
it's very common.
Yeah. So why would that have been confidential when it affects so many people?
I think probably we usually in public comments it's not a back
Oh.
and forth. So what I recommend that you do is you email Dr. Zublionis.
Yeah, if you email me, let me try and get answers to those questions. But I can tell one other part of that question is it isn't clear totally about the power generation. First of all, what power is going to be generated and how it's taxed. And that's something this board and the district has struggled with over the past couple of years. It isn't clearly stated. It isn't totally clear to people who've asked the question. So that's why we do need to meet with the IDA. We do need to try and meet with the utilities to get more clarity. And at that same time that's not clear, we're also unclear on what's going to be developed. We have more, so just as a segue to the second question about residential development, we have more clarity on the Engineers Country Club and the environmental impact study that was done in lieu with the Village of Roslyn Harbor. And so we have more numbers on the projections for possible development. We don't have more on the other development. That's relatively newer. And so that's a question too that we would have for the NASA IDA.
Yeah.
One additional point of clarification. The gentleman may be correct in terms of the stated evacuation radius. I'm not sure about that, but as you investigate, I'm sure you'll find out. But at one fire at lithium plant at upstate New York, it did result in a shelter in place order within a 1 mile radius. And there was another 1 mile shelter in place plan that almost happened in East Hampton. So they do use the 1 mile rule, it seems like, when these fires actually happen. So just, again, as you investigate, if you could just keep that in mind. Just one comment, I guess, about the budget. I kind of happen to agree that it's going to be a bit of a PR nightmare, so to speak, to go out with something that's close to 4%. most people, very simplistically, believe that the tax cap is 2%. So, then, you know, unfortunately, people don't come to these meetings. They don't go to budget talks. So they have 2% in their head, the general populace. So when they see 4%, and when they see other districts nowhere near 4%, it's going to create a bit of a PR problem. So just, again, something to keep in mind as you go forward, that you are facing an uphill battle when you're doubling the perception of what people have in their mind. So.
Thank you.
David Hellman, Glenwood Lending. I agree with the gentleman on the PR perception there. You know, anyone that's looked at any kind of markets or anything like that, perception means a lot more than facts, unfortunately, in many instances. But my question was, in the presentation, there was mention, or at least an allusion, that as more people are moving in, presumably more houses that may be coming from these golf courses or whatnot, that actually would be a benefit for the school district. Obviously, there are fixed costs. You have to have one central administration, whether you have 200 extra kids or not. But is it really a net benefit in terms of the marginal cost, obviously the additional cost to educate these new students versus the additional tax revenues? Thank you.
Two changes really, right? So there are two costs. The cost, how it impacts the individual taxpayer.
Right.
And then how it impacts us in terms of how we're paying for the added students.
Yeah, so the extra assessed value that would come from those properties would most certainly decrease the tax rate wherever it was at that point in time. It's hard to answer the marginal cost with the number of students because the distribution of those students age-wise makes a difference. By grade, by school, it could result in the need for no new teachers if it was distributed evenly, if it was distributed the right way, which is in the environmental impact study how they calculate it. So that, I think, is part of the issue as well. Overall, I think in looking at the environmental impact study, it would be a net positive in terms of the tax picture, with hopefully less cost to the schools the way it is projected.
The RXR people are marketing the Engineers Club as there are going to be no children in there. Though there's no prohibition, it's not a 55 and over community. There are condos and single family homes with multiple bedrooms. So it's hard for me to believe that children won't be going into those developments, but you don't know what ages either.
I think with the inventory, being, shorter, having less inventory in suburban areas, I think what Trustee Russo is saying is correct. And we don't know with certainty. We know what was said in the environmental impact study, but how the taxes will be calculated. The study says that there are two different kinds of homes on I'm just talking about engineers, which we know much more about. Some would fall into class 2 condos co-ops, and some would fall into class 1 more residential homes. So again, I know, and I'm sorry, I wish we had more known knowns, but we have some preliminary knowledge, and we have to continue to push to get more specific knowledge before it's finalized.
Any other public comments? I will now close the floor for public comments, and we will move to action 10, personnel, A through D. Do I have a motion? Okay, for a second. Any questions, comments? All in favor? Okay, excellent. I'm going to take action 11, approval to dispose of inventory, with action 12, approval of musicians for high school musical. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Okay, questions, comments? All right. All in favor? Okay, thank you. Action 13, acceptance of donations, A through D. And we'll take that with action 14, approval of contracts, A through C. Do I have a motion? Okay, Lisa and Maria. Yes, please.
I'd like to make a motion to pull out 14C as a separate vote.
So I have to ask for a second to that motion, correct? All in favor of that?
But sorry, I think you theoretically have discussion
Oh, discussion on that?
if people want to.
I don't want to vote no on everything. So that's
Fair
the
enough.
answer.
Fair enough. All in favor? Okay, so let's take action. Can I do action 13 and action 14, A and B? Do I have a motion for that?
One less controversial comment?
I don't,
Or did we miss the comment?
technically.
I think you need a motion on 13A, B, D, and 14A, B, C together. So, yeah.
Oh, wait, 13, no.
A and B.
Yeah,
Okay, got it.
yeah. So the motion on the table is action 13, A through D, and 14, A and B. So I need a motion for that.
Motion.
Okay, I heard a second. Questions, comments?
My comment is just to express gratitude to the PTSOs for these incredible donations.
Thank you.
That's all.
All in favor? Okay, excellent. Now we're going to go to action 14C, approval of the modification of the agreement between North Shore and Joe Dragone. Motion on that. Maria, who was the second? Okay. Questions, comments?
I just want to make a comment. I did not find the study as hopeful as I had wanted it to be. Much of the information in there was taken from, publicly available sources, and it's a little ironic that, members of the public had used that same information source at points, and the board didn't accept it, and I didn't find a lot of instruction on how to reduce the cost. So I had hoped for a more in-depth analysis from that study. Something more than I thought. A lot of it was synthesizing publicly available information. There was some commentary in there which was just not supported by any data. I think the idea of, honestly, we could put in the data ourselves from other districts if we want it. I just don't. I don't want to spend another $25,000 on supplementing this study.
My math was 4,500. I want to make sure maybe we should be clear before we.
It's $180 per hour, and it would not exceed $75. 75 hours.
Well, I think we've already done 75 hours. I think
Oh,
it's
wait,
only 32
I'm sorry.
more
I
hours.
missed. Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm reading the wrong time. 25 hours.
It's just everyone's entitled to their own opinion.
And I'm sorry you were disappointed. I know you were very excited about the consultant. Any other comments?
I think my take on it is different than Mary Ann's, though I shared some issues. But for me, I'll be supporting this because I think the improvement, the enhancement/improvement that we'll get, I think it'll be worth the money to be able to help us as a working document. I think you're in for a penny. You got to be in for the pound, so to speak, when the pound is not too egregious.
I'd like to agree with that. It seems to me from what we have in the backup material that what he's going to do now is exactly what, the suggestions we've made to make the report more useful. So I'd sort of like to complete the circle now, and it does seem like quite a small amount to get that done.
Sorry, just about beginning of it. On behalf of the community, whose money we're spending, the community through us, the community commissioned this report. let's give them the full report as, at least as best as this iteration of a report can give us, which I understand Mary is, encapsulation of some of the limitations with which I do not entirely disagree.
I was going to say, I don't disagree at all with Trustee Russo's, some of her characterizations of the first draft, but I do think, for reasons already mentioned, that it is worth the incremental investment to have him, the benefit of our feedback on that first draft so that we can get a more functional document, because were it to accomplish what we hope it will accomplish, it could be very helpful.
Okay.
And I will agree with my fellow trustees. I can't even speak, it's so late. But I will say I did find the information to be pretty useful. I would like to see this updated version with what we've requested, but I also did think that the presentation showed us and the document showed us that there is no easy answer. There are no easy places to cut, and there really were no wasted dollars. So I did appreciate it. And for $180 an hour, we're not spending, tens and tens of thousands of dollars on an evaluation here. I think it's cost effective, and I'm happy to support it.
A quick follow-up point, which is that there was a not insignificant request from the community for a finished, completed report, and so I think we deserve that. On behalf of the people who really requested this kind of public, external, analysis, I would like to see this completion.
I just want to second Vice President Colasiopo's point, which is part of the point of doing the study is there's no magic bullet.
And in fairness to Mr. Dragone, he carried out exactly what the board had tasked him with, and he also did it at a much lower price compared to some of the other consultants Dr. Z met with. So, all in favor? Okay. Action. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you got that. Oh, opposed. Okay. Action, it doesn't happen frequently. Action 15, approval of health services contract A through C. And I'm going to take that with action 16, approval of change orders A and B. Do I have a motion?
Motion.
Okay, or a second. Questions, comments? All in favor? Okay, excellent. Action 17, approval of special education tuition agreement with action 18, our IEP is. Motion, perfect. Questions, comments? All in favor? Okay. Board committee reports.
Can I
For the record, I didn't want to put it on tonight.
Can I make
For
a motion?
the record, yeah.
Can I make a motion to postpone this to the next meeting?
Yes.
Second.
Really? Wow, all in favor?
Can I make a comment about why it's a good idea? Because there's not that much to report on monthly meetings that are happening next week. So.
Yeah, we should blame Lisa Colasiopa for this.
I will say I disagree because I have wellness and athletic advisory right here, ready to go. But fine, next time I'll have to.
Don't meet again,
two
and then you're all set.
Maybe I will.
All right.
I do think it's important to have the public know that we're meeting and participating in these committees. They're all going on, but it is rather late.
In fairness, it's going to be even later next time. Yeah. So did we vote on that? No, we did.
Vote, did we?
Vote
I
Maria had some
interrupted-
discussion.
I
I'm going to
interrupted
vote
the
no.
vote.
right.
I am voting no.
The motion got a lot of attention, but we didn't
Call the
vote.
vote. Call the vote.
All right. So all in favor of tabling this for another meeting? I'll go with it. Wow, look at you. All against? You hold that hand proud. All right. All right. Very good.
Lisa's probably right.
We
but it's
should,
too late.
I'm sorry, I should have said this before we voted on the discussion. We should think of a better way of doing the board committee reports. And, we could assign someone, we used to do this on the committee and alternate to do a short summary. And maybe Betty could attach that to the minutes rather than talking at 11:15 at night where no one can even focus.
the public then would have to read the minutes.
Just a point of order, we're having a discussion at a non, bulleted point, so I think.
All right. So, we tabled it, we moved on. This was one time Lisa did not agree with her fellow trustees. Yeah.
The only time.
Okay. Unfinished business. Up. Trustee Galati.
When we had the meeting where the science and math programs were discussed, I had asked a question about the physics program, and I was told it was going to be looked at again. I was just wondering what progress we're at, or are we going to continue the way it was presented, or are there changes?
We did some research, and actually I'm meeting with Mr. Minchell tomorrow about it.
Programs now, so I would think that they would really need to know in advance. That's the only reason I was asking tonight.
We actually collected the students who actually had enrolled and are kind of even looking at them and kind of their trajectory. So, and we realized we'd have to inform them of any changes.
Any other unfinished business? New business.
New business. Can we look at the way we do board committee reports?
Amen.
And schedule discussion topics?
All right.
It's just not productive at 11:15 at night. I mean, we all go to work early in the morning.
Maybe we could stagger them, and so like Lisa was ready tonight, we could have sat through one report as opposed to like every committee when we do it.
That would be one great improvement, yeah.
Right?
Would be a good improvement.
The only thing is, though, the next month we're going to have another one. She's going to do it again.
I'm happy to just submit it to Betty, honestly. Like if, I don't know, unless there's something.
Look, this is
don't
what I think.
Yeah.
As somebody who's watched these board committee reports, I think a lot of you just go too far into it. And there has to be a better summary of the event. It does not need to be a script of what happens at the meeting.
Point of order, my last report was very short.
Maybe we title it 90-second board reports.
Okay.
Like, we just had that big construction presentation. I mean, some stuff has gone on, right, with the elementaries and the sign, but we don't need to rehash what we've, done for the year. And then if you just do a short report at the end of the year, we used to do like a short summary. It wasn't verbatim, right? And then at the end of the year, there'd be an end of the year report, right? Sort of summarized it.
I've been doing those for LAC the past 2 years. So I didn't know that it was formally required, but I do think it's a great idea.
But don't read it.
No.
Just put it into the minutes.
It gets distributed to the
right.
board.
So so everyone has it,
Yeah.
and you could attach it to the minutes. So if someone in the public is interested in what did they do in construction this year, or what did they do in LAC, they could just look online and read it.
There are times I do definitely want to report what LAC is doing, so we talk about.
But you can.
Right.
I'm not
Okay.
saying you don't. Maybe we can. But if there's a summary that's available in written form, maybe we don't have to talk about everything.
Leadership will talk this over.
I mean, I was
My
just going to
idea.
say that I think, I think keeping it short is probably the way to go, because I do agree with Trustee Cashman that it's nice to hear what's going on in the other committees that we're not part of. So just the high level summary.
If you want to do more detail in your written report, you can.
I to have to write something is very annoying. It's like an
Here's-
added task.
So here's
I
one
know,
other
I
perspective.
know.
If you're shortening the reports, which I'm all for, and this is part of a specific agenda item that is board reports, is it possible because I do also like to know what's going on, and I think it's useful if other trustees can ask questions. I mean, is there any reason we can't have a discussion? Say, oh, what did just to
Want more detail
Yeah, if
about
you want more
something that's
detail.
that was mentioned.
That's all I'm asking. Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead, Dave.
I have just a very short new business. It'll be less than 90 seconds. Just that I find myself having conversations about like civil discourse and politics and the nature of the way we as a community and as a society discuss these things. And that the point of a great civics program, which we have, is obviously not to tell kids what to think, but to pose questions that help these kids develop their own worldview so they can participate in the world. And in people that I've spoken to, they are sort of the mind that it doesn't happen as much in our classes because everything is so delicate and fraught and argumentative these days. And so I was really heartened to see the Parent University on civil discourse. So Dr. Z, you had mentioned earlier that there would be a way to potentially make what went on there more public. I'm on board.
Yeah.
I want to know.
And we really don't have any specificity on that. It was really just a conversation that came up at the end with the people in the audience, actually, with the parents who were there. And so that's kind of like where we are is with that question. What would be the best way to do that honors the work? And
it's important. It's important work.
There were 400 people at the Lunar celebration. There were 6 at the Civil Discourse Parent University, which was phenomenal. And I mean, I think the one answer when we were discussing how do we get more people to come to this, given how popular the other event was maybe we need to serve food. But that's the best idea we came up with so far. It is a shame that we can't, maybe this was also an unfortunate scheduling conflict.
I don't know when it would be or how it would fit. We have a jam-packed event meeting calendar, and I'm already thinking about finding a way to talk about community development, the golf clubs and whatnot. We have a lot to cover. But I would like to know how civil discourse is fostered within our high school social studies and civics classes. We have the seal of civic readiness. People are getting it. I think that's an important thing for our world, for these kids. We're going to launch into this world that hopefully they can make better than the one in which we're in right now.
Was it recorded? I mean, sometimes you can't record because there's a speaker and they won't let you record.
I don't think so. But the presentation's
It wasn't
available.
recorded, and I have to say, as a person who participated as a parent, I feel like the conversation that they put the participants through the spider web and really gave the essence of how this discourse is happening. And they took us through the timeline and the evolution of the academic portion. So in that way, I think that portion would be so interesting. And I think it could be relatively brief compared to the 1 hour that we spent, just the top line of the evolution and how it is being executed across disciplines in social studies and in English, for example. But I don't, even if we were to share the PowerPoint, because they had the QR codes all over the library, which was so charming and helpful because some of the text was actually pretty small, it would not give the essence. Like, I almost don't want you to see the PowerPoint without the benefit of the presentation that went along with it, because it was so rich, and some of the tools that we were given and thought processes that we were asked to go through and the breakout sessions, it was great.
We consider possibly, even if it's not this year, a second session.
Or what you could do if you want to put it in the classrooms is you could do a parent university, but you could also do a training session for your social studies and English teachers with the person who did the civil whoever the speaker was.
Actually, Julie Ritter and Seth Gordon were the presenters, and they actually were sharing what they did with the faculty as well. So they were kind of sharing that as well.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Any other new business? Things happening here, even under fiscal pressure. So that's it. We're done for the evening. Everyone go home. 5 hours. I will now adjourn the meeting.